Maggie Holloway did not cry when the last man who claimed to love her looked her in the eye and said she was too much to carry. She did not cry when she sold everything she owned to buy a train ticket to a town she had never heard of, to marry a man she had never met. She did not cry on the platform in the cold, when Nathaniel Brooks walked out of the dark with a lantern, looked straight at her, and said the 5 words that broke something loose inside her chest she had spent years nailing shut: "I've got a spare room." She nearly collapsed against the wagon wheel right there in the dirt. If this story already has its hand around your heart, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Maggie all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really began. The woman in seat 14 on the Cheyenne line did not look like someone running toward anything. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running away and simply sat down in the direction she was already facing, because there was nothing left behind her worth turning back for. Maggie Holloway was 27 years old. She had a single traveling bag wedged between her feet, a letter folded inside her coat pocket that she had read so many times. The crease had gone soft, and the particular stillness of a person who has learned that drawing attention to yourself costs more than it's worth. The woman across the aisle had been watching her since Laramie. Maggie knew it. She didn't look up. The woman leaned slightly toward the man beside her and said in the lowered voice people use when they want to be heard, but not blamed for saying it, "Goodness, she takes up the whole seat, doesn't she?" The man said nothing. The woman said, "I just wonder where someone like that is headed. You'd think she'd know better than to travel alone." Maggie kept her hands flat on her knees. She kept her eyes on the window. She kept her breathing even and slow, and she thought about the letter in her pocket, and she thought about the 4 lines in a newspaper that had changed the direction of her entire life, and she thought, 2 more hours. You just have to be still for 2 more hours. That was a skill she had. Being still. She had been practicing it her whole life. She had been practicing it in the boarding houses of Denver, where the landladies looked at her figure before they looked at her references. She had been practicing it in the church circles where she was useful for the baking and the hemming, and never for the conversation. She had been practicing it 6 months ago in a parlor in Denver, when a man named Thomas Aldridge took both her hands, looked at her with something that might have been real feeling, and said, "My family has expectations. Maggie, I don't think you quite," and stopped. He had the decency to stop. She had the practice to nod and say she understood and walk home without breaking until she was behind her own door. Then she had written a letter to a stranger in Wyoming. Not because she was desperate, because she was done. Done with parlors that made her feel she was taking up space that belonged to someone thinner, someone quieter, someone easier to carry. Done with work that got praised and presents that got apologized for. Done with being the woman people were glad to have around until they had to actually claim her. The advertisement had been 4 lines. She had torn it out carefully and read it 4 times before she wrote back. Rancher widowed, Red Hollow, Wyoming. Requires dependable woman willing to work hard and keep a household. No promises made. Write to N. Brooks, Canyon Creek Ranch. No promises made. Every other man who had ever expressed any interest in Maggie Holloway had led with promises. Warmth. Belonging. Eventually. She had collected those promises, and they had all turned to the same thing in the end, which was nothing. This man led with honesty. She wrote back the same night. 1 page. Straight and plain. She told him what she could do. She did not describe herself. She figured if her appearance was going to end it, better to know that before she spent money she didn't have on a ticket she couldn't afford to waste. His reply came in 12 days. Miss Holloway, your letter was sufficient. Come when you're ready. I've got a spare room. It's yours. N. Brooks. She read it standing at the window in the gray morning light. She read it 3 times. Then she sat down on the edge of her narrow bed and pressed both hands against her stomach and held very still, because something had moved inside her chest that she hadn't felt move in a long time. Something she didn't have a name for anymore. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as hope, but that she was absolutely not going to call that. She packed the next morning. Now she was on the train, and the woman across the aisle was still watching, and Maggie was still, and Wyoming was coming at her through the window in long, cold sweeps of hill and sky, and somewhere up ahead was a town she had never seen, and a man she had never met, and a spare room that he had said he had written it plain as anything was hers. The train pulled into Red Hollow 40 minutes late. Maggie was the third person off. She stepped down onto the platform, and the cold hit her immediately, a real cold. The kind that had geography in it, that came off the hills with the smell of pine and something mineral and clean. She stood on the platform with her bag in her hand, and she breathed it in, and she told herself very firmly, "This is a work arrangement. He needs help. You need a place. Do not make it more than it is. Do not hope." She said this to herself, and then she heard boots on the boards behind her, and she turned. He was not what she had pictured, though she had been very careful not to picture anything. Nathaniel Brooks was lean and weathered in the way of men who spend their lives working ground that doesn't give easily. He was older than she'd expected, closer to 40 than 30, with a face that had been rearranged by weather and work, and some considerable interior experience into something that wasn't handsome exactly, but was completely, utterly real. He wore a canvas coat that had done years of actual labor. He was carrying a lantern, even though the sun had not yet finished setting, and she had the brief odd thought that this was a man who brought light to things on principle rather than necessity. He looked at her. She made herself stand straight. She had learned through years of the first look exactly how to hold herself during it, how to not flinch, how to give a person the space to take their measure without showing that she knew what they were doing. He looked at her the way you look at a person you are genuinely paying attention to, not assessing, not calculating, just looking. Then he said, "Miss Holloway." "Yes," she said. "One bag," he said. "I travel light," she said. "It's easier." He nodded like that made complete sense, reached out and picked up her bag before she had the chance to say a word about it. "Wagon's out front," he said. "I've got a spare room at the ranch. It's yours. We'll talk the rest tomorrow when you've slept." She followed him off the platform and told herself the tightness in her throat was from the cold. The ride to Canyon Creek Ranch was an hour in the dark, and neither of them talked much, and she was grateful. She was not ready to talk. She needed to look at the land and breathe it in and let Wyoming do whatever Wyoming was going to do to her before she had to perform being fine for anybody. The stars out here were not like Denver stars. They were not polite about it. They spread across the whole sky like they owned it, thick and serious and crowded, and she sat in the wagon and watched them, and felt for the first time and she could not remember how long that she was in a place large enough to contain her. She did not let herself think about what that meant. When the wagon came over a low rise, and she saw the ranch below, lights in 2 windows, a solid structure against the dark, the smell of wood smoke, she felt something land quietly in the center of her chest. Not hope. Not yet. Just the smallest whisper of maybe. Nathaniel jumped down and came around and offered her a hand. Not ceremoniously. Just because that's what you did. She took it and stepped down, and the ground under her feet was Wyoming ground, solid and cold and real. "Kitchen's warm," he said. "Pot's on. You eat then sleep. That's all for tonight." "Mr. Brooks," she said. She had to say it now before she lost the nerve. "I want to be clear about what I'm here for. I know this is a practical arrangement. I'm not here with expectations beyond the letter. I'm here to work. I'll earn my place." He had started toward the door. He stopped. He turned around and looked at her, and in the lantern light she couldn't read his expression well, but something in it was very direct. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I didn't write to you because I needed someone to earn anything. I wrote because this house has been empty a long time, and I'm not enough by myself to fill it." A pause. "Now come inside before you freeze." He turned back to the door. She stood in the cold for exactly 1 moment. 1 moment of standing completely still, while something she had no name for moved again, that same thing in the same place behind her sternum. Then she picked up her bag and followed him in. The stew was simple and good. The bread was plain. He sat across from her and ate in the same quiet, focused way he seemed to do most things, and when she finished her bowl, he refilled it without asking. The same way he'd refilled it without asking, and she thought, this man has lived with another person before. He remembers the shape of it. When he finished, he pushed back from the table and said, "Room's upstairs, end of the hall. Window sticks in the cold lean on the left side. There's soap and a candle." He paused. "Clara kept it neat. I tried to keep it that way." "Thank you," she said. "Sleep as long as you need. Ranch starts early, but I don't need you at sunrise your first day." "I'll be up at sunrise," she said. That corner of his mouth shifted. Just barely. Just the shadow of something. "Nathaniel," he said. "Mr. Brooks was my father." She lay on top of the quilt that night because it felt presumptuous to get under it on the first night. She looked at the ceiling and the faded curtain, and the careful rug on the floor, and the soap that smelled clean, and she told herself firmly, clearly, "This is a spare room. It is not yours. You are here because it is practical. Do not mistake kindness for permanence. Do not." She fell asleep within 10 minutes. She was downstairs before sunrise. The stove was cold and the kitchen was dark, and she had the fire going and the water heating before she heard his boots on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway and stopped. He looked at the stove. He looked at her. He looked at the stove again. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "How do you take your coffee?" A beat of silence. A real one. "Black," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put the skillet on. She found eggs and bacon, and she made what there was to make, and they ate in the early dark, with the stove ticking and the wind at the windows, and it was the most ordinary morning imaginable, and she was so grateful for ordinary she could barely stand it. After breakfast, he showed her the house. The root cellar, the smokehouse, the storage room off the kitchen, where the dry goods lived in a decade of disorder. He showed her the household ledger, rough handwriting perfectly legible, and explained the ranch hand's meal arrangement. "How many men?" she asked. "4," he said. "Rios, McKee, Walsh, Calhoun. Good workers. And if they give me trouble—" He looked at her steadily. "They won't. But if they do, then they answer to me," he said. "Same day." She nodded. She spent the rest of the morning in the kitchen. The dry goods had no system. 3 types of flour in 3 different containers. Spices in no order useful to actual cooking. Preserves stacked without date or type. She did not comment on any of it. She simply organized. Labeled everything. Added an inventory list to the back of the ledger where there was space. When Nathaniel came in at the end of the day, he stopped in the kitchen doorway, the way he'd stopped that morning. He looked at the shelves for a long moment. "You did all this today," he said. There was time. He picked up the ledger. "Read the inventory list slowly." "You caught the cornmeal shortage," he said. "You'd have run out by Friday," she said. "I'll add it to the supply order. When does the wagon come?" "How did you know to ask Rios?" "He looked like the one who'd know," she said. He looked at her with that steady, unreadable expression. Then supper, 20 minutes, she said. He sat down at the kitchen table. He did not leave. He did not offer to help, and he did not get in the way. He sat with his coffee, and he watched her move around his kitchen, and she pretended not to notice him noticing. But she noticed. She filed it carefully in the same place she filed the bag he'd picked up without asking, and the bowl he'd refilled without asking, and the word Nathaniel said in the dark by the lantern, all of it filed away in the place where she kept things that were real and solid, and that she was not yet ready to examine. That first dinner, all 4 ranch hands around the table, venison stew with proper seasoning biscuits that had risen right. She was refilling the water pitcher when she looked up and saw it. All 4 men were eating with their backs straight. Not the resignation hunch of men eating because they had to. The focused pleasure of men eating because the food was genuinely good. Because someone had actually cared about it. Miguel Rios looked up first and caught her watching. "Ma'am," he said, and there was nothing performative in it. "Best meal I've had on this ranch since I can remember." Young Patrick McKee looked up from his plate. "My mother made biscuits like these," he said with the absolute sincerity of a man who means something by it. She said thank you and turned back to the kitchen. She stood at the stove with her hands on the warm iron and her eyes on the wall in front of her, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she did not cry. She had cooked for people her entire life. She had cooked in boarding houses and church kitchens and other women's homes. She had been thanked for it in the perfunctory way people thank a surface: the table, the chair, the useful object that makes their comfort possible. She had never been thanked like that, like she had given them something that mattered. She pressed her hands harder against the stove and thought, "All right. This part I know. This is where I start." Old Calhoun was the last man out. He moved slow and deliberate, the way of a man who'd survived enough winters to stop being in a hurry. At the door he stopped, looked back at her. "Mrs. Brooks," he said. Quiet. Not a mistake. She opened her mouth to correct him. He was already gone. The days moved. A week. Then 2. She fixed the broken latch on the smokehouse door that had been broken since fall. She stuffed the gap in the root cellar insulation that was costing them preserves to the cold. She found the curtains in the kitchen, letting wind through the edges, and tacked them tight. She did not announce any of it. She just did it. And Nathaniel watched. Not obviously, not uncomfortably, but she caught it the way his eyes tracked the changes in a room when he walked in. The slight pause. The look of a man taking inventory of something he hadn't expected. One evening she was mending a chair leg that had been rocking for what looked like a season when he came in from the barn and stopped in the kitchen doorway. "I would have gotten to that," he said. "When?" she said. "A beat. Spring." She looked up at him. "It's November. I know when it is," he said. "The chair would have been kindling by spring," she said. He looked at the chair. He looked at her. And that thing happened at the corner of his mouth again, that almost thing. "I'm better with cattle than houses," he said. "I noticed," she said. "You're going to keep saying that, aren't you?" he said. "Every time it's true," she said. He made a sound. Low. Not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one. She had not heard him make that sound before. She kept her eyes on the chair leg, and did not make anything of it, and filed it away in that place where she kept things. The trouble came from town. She went with him on the supply run 2 weeks in. The general store was run by a woman named Mrs. Farley, who had a face built for skepticism, and who looked at Maggie the way you look at a line item in an account you didn't authorize. "This is Miss Holloway," Nathaniel said. "She manages the household accounts now. Her name goes on the credit." Mrs. Farley looked at Maggie, at Nathaniel, back at Maggie, taking in the full picture with the quick efficiency of a woman who had formed an opinion before the door finished opening. "I see," she said, the 2 words carrying a paragraph. "Cornmeal, salt, pork, dried beans on that list," Maggie said, placing the paper on the counter. Her voice was even, calm. She had learned that the most effective response to being measured was to be entirely focused on the task in front of her. "And if you have dried apples, 10 pounds. Mrs. Farley took the list. Outside loading the wagon, Maggie heard it. 2 women near the post office voices dropped just enough to indicate they meant to be overheard. "That's the one he sent for, apparently." I heard. "Can you imagine a man of his standing?" "Well, you can see why she took the offer. It's not like she'd have gotten one otherwise." Maggie kept her hands on the supply crate. She kept loading. She did not pause, and she did not look over, and she did not give them the satisfaction of knowing the words had landed. But they had landed, in the wagon. Nathaniel said nothing for a while. Then, "Farley's the worst gossip in the county. Everything she sees is through 6 other people by nightfall." "I know," Maggie said. "You handled that well." "I've had a lot of practice," she said. Silence. Then he said quietly, in the voice of a man choosing his words from the short stack, "That shouldn't be something a person needs practice at." She looked at the road. "No," she said. "It shouldn't." That was the night Clayton Mercer came to the ranch. She heard the horse first. Heavy, expensive, ridden with the confidence of a man who'd never had cause to ride any other way. She was in the kitchen when Nathaniel opened the front door, and she stayed where she was, because she had learned to understand the shape of things before she walked into them. Brooks. Smooth. The particular smoothness of a man who had been the most important person in every room he'd entered for so long, he'd forgotten rooms could work any other way. "Heard you had company. Thought I'd pay my respects." "Mercer," Nathaniel said. Flat. Not hostile, not warm. A name said. Mail order business, is it? Something in his tone put the words in quotation marks without using them. I have to say I was surprised. You always seemed like a man with particular standards. My standards, Nathaniel said, aren't something I've ever asked your opinion on. Naturally not. I'm simply a neighbor expressing concern. A pause. The kind of pause that is not empty. They're saying she's well. Not exactly what a man in your position would typically choose. People are talking Brooks. The kind of people whose words carry weight. Let them carry it somewhere else, Nathaniel said. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to make yourself feel large, Nathaniel said. Those aren't the same thing. Good night, Mercer. The door closed. Maggie's hands had gone still on the biscuit dough. Nathaniel's boots crossed the floor. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. She did not turn around. Don't apologize for him, she said. I wasn't going to, he said. Good. A beat of silence. Then he said, what he said. I heard it, she said. I understand it. I've understood it my whole life in one form or another. She pressed the dough down with the heel of her hand. It doesn't change what I'm doing. Nothing he says changes what I'm doing. No, Nathaniel said. It doesn't. She heard him move. He pulled out the chair at the kitchen table and sat down, not leaving, just sitting. Maggie, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name without the miss in front of it. She turned around. Howe was looking at her with the same expression he'd had on the platform, not assessing, not calculating, just looking. What he said about typical, Nathaniel said. I want to be straight with you about something. You don't have to. I want to, he said. I wrote that advertisement because this house was empty and I needed help, and I told myself that was the whole of it. That's what I believed when I wrote it. He stopped, started again. But you've been here 2 weeks, and that root cellar is fixed, and the smokehouse latch is fixed, and those men ate dinner tonight, like somebody gave a damn what they put in their mouths and... He stopped again. This was clearly not a man who did this kind of talking easily. What I'm trying to say is that I think I lied to myself about what I was looking for, and I don't want you operating on the wrong information. The kitchen was very quiet. What information should I be operating on? She asked carefully. He looked at her. That this might be more than a spare room, he said. If you're willing. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She looked at them. She thought about Thomas Aldridge and Mrs. Farley, and the women by the post office, and the boarding house landlady, and the church circle, and 27 years of being the useful one, the capable one, the one who got the job done, and then got set aside. I don't know how to do that, she said. I don't know how to... She stopped. Tried again. I know how to earn my place. I've been earning my place my entire life. I don't know how to just have one. I know, he said. Neither do I. She looked up at him. Clara was sick a long time before she went, he said. It was the first time he'd said her name out loud to Maggie. 3 years. I spent 3 years learning how to hold everything together by myself, and after she was gone, I just kept doing it. Holding everything. By myself. He paused. I forgot what it was like to have someone in the room. The stove ticked. Wind pressed the window. And then you came downstairs before sunrise, he said, and there was coffee already on. She didn't say anything. And the chair's not going to be kindling, he said. She laughed. And surprised, and entirely real, the kind of laugh that gets out before you can decide whether to let it. He looked at her like that laugh had done something to the room. There it is, he said quietly, almost to himself. There what is, she said. That, he said, and did not elaborate, and she did not ask him to, because she thought she understood, and because she was not quite ready yet for what understanding it fully might mean. She finished the biscuits. He stayed at the table. They did not talk much more, but the silence was different now, not the silence of two people being careful with each other, but the silence of two people who had said something real and were letting it settle. When she finally said good night and went upstairs, she sat on the edge of the bed in the faded room with the careful rug and the soap that smelled clean, and she pressed her hands flat on her knees. For the first time since Thomas Aldridge's parlor, Since the boarding house landlady, since the church circle, since every room that had quietly decided she was too much for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember. Maggie Holloway did not talk herself out of the feeling that had taken up residence behind her sternum. She let it stay. She did not call it hope, but she stopped calling it nothing. Outside Wyoming was cold and vast and full of stars, and somewhere below her, Nathaniel Brooks was sitting at his kitchen table in the dark, and the room was not empty. And for both of them, though, neither would have said it out loud. Yet something had changed that was not going to change back. She pulled the quilt back. She got under it. She slept. She got under the quilt that night, and she did not lie awake the way she expected to. She had expected the ceiling-staring kind of night, the kind where every word said and unsaid comes back in a different order, and you rebuild the entire evening 3 times looking for the thing you should have said differently. She had those nights often. She was good at them the way you get good at something you do constantly, whether you want to or not. But instead she slept. Solid and deep the way you sleep when your body has decided without consulting you that it is safe enough to let go. She woke before the alarm of habit told her to, while the room was still gray and the house was still quiet. And she lay for exactly 1 moment, looking at the ceiling of a room that was not hers, and thinking about a man sitting at a kitchen table in the dark, saying this might be more than a spare room. Then she got up, because that was what she knew how to do. You got up. You put your feet on the floor. You moved forward into the day before the day had the chance to become something you had to brace against. The stove was cold. She had it going in 4 minutes. Coffee on in 6. She was cracking eggs into the skillet when she heard his boots on the stairs, and she did not turn around, and he came into the kitchen, and she said without looking up, "Sit down, 10 minutes. A pause behind her. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. "Black same as yesterday." She heard the chair pull out. She heard him sit. She poured his coffee and set it on the table without ceremony, and he picked it up and drank it, and neither of them said a word about the night before. And that the not saying felt she realized like its own kind of language. The language of 2 people who have agreed on something without making it formal. Who have left a door open and decided mutually and without discussion not to make a production of the fact. She put the plate in front of him. He looked at it, then up at her. "You didn't have to do eggs." "I know," she said. "I usually just have coffee in the morning." "That explains a lot," she said. He looked at her. "About why you're so difficult before 8 o'clock, she said. Another one of those almost sounds, low, adjacent to a laugh. She sat down across from him with her own plate, and they ate, and through the window, the Wyoming morning was coming on in that slow, enormous way it had, and the stove ticked, and outside she could hear Rios already moving between the barn and the fence line, and it was the most ordinary morning she could imagine, and she thought, I could do this. I could do this every day. She shut that thought down immediately, but not before she'd had it. The supply wagon came that Friday. She was ready for it with a list she'd organized by category: dry goods, hardware, medicinal, livestock, and the driver, an older man named Hennessy, who had apparently been delivering to Canyon Creek for 11 years, looked at the list and then looked at her and said, "You wrote this." "I did," she said. "Brooks usually just tells me what he's out of," Hennessy said. "Takes me twice as long because he forgets half of it until I'm already leaving. He's better with cattle than logistics," she said. Hennessy laughed outright, a real laugh. "You've been here 2 weeks and you already know that." "Some things are obvious," she said. Hennessy told her later she found out eventually that he'd gone back to town and told 3 separate people that the Brooks Ranch had a woman who ran a tighter operation than most of the businesses on Main Street. It was meant as a compliment. It reached people who did not receive it as one. It reached Vivian Carlisle by Saturday evening. Maggie didn't know who Vivian Carlisle was until the following Tuesday, when she went into town alone for the first time to pick up thread and a bolt of wool from Farley's general store. She was at the counter when she heard the voice behind her, bright arranged, the voice of a woman who has spent considerable time learning exactly how to sound pleasant while saying something that isn't. "You must be the woman from the Brooks Ranch." Maggie turned. Vivian Carlisle was beautiful in the way of women who have always been beautiful and have organized their entire sense of self around it. Fair-haired, fine-boned, wearing a dress that had no business being worn for a Tuesday in Red Hollow. She was looking at Maggie with a smile that was all surface and no warmth, the smile of a woman taking a careful inventory. "I'm Maggie Holloway," Maggie said. "And you are Vivian Carlyle." She let the name settle like she expected it to mean something. "My family has the property just north of Nathaniel's. We've known each other for years." "How nice," Maggie said, and turned back to the counter. "It's a difficult place," Vivian said. "The ranch. He's a difficult man. I imagine it's a lot to take on for someone unfamiliar with the territory." Maggie picked up the thread she'd selected, placed it on the counter. "Mrs. Farley, I'll take 3 yards of the wool as well." "It's Miss Carlyle," Vivian said with something sharp running just underneath. "I haven't married." "I see," Maggie said. And she did see. She saw it all in a single clear read, the way you see the whole pattern of a quilt when you step back far enough. Vivian Carlyle had been waiting for Nathaniel Brooks. Maybe not with any formal expectation, maybe not even with a plan exactly, but she had been waiting in that particular way. Women sometimes waited present, available, patient, certain that eventually the right man would look up and see what had been there all along. And then Maggie Holloway had arrived on a train from Cheyenne with 1 bag and a 4-line newspaper advertisement, and Nathaniel Brooks had not looked up. He had simply gone to pick her up. "He's a good man," Vivian said, and now the pleasant surface had a hairline crack in it. "A private man. People here, we look out for each other. We make sure our own are treated right." Maggie looked at her. Vivian looked back. "So do I," Maggie said. Quiet, completely even. "That's what I'm there for." She paid for her goods and walked out, and she did not let herself feel anything about it until she was back on the road to the ranch, and then she let herself feel it for exactly the length of time it took her to drive past the stand of birch trees at the edge of the Carlyle property, and then she put it away. She had been managed by women like Vivian Carlyle her entire life. Women who were gentle with the knife. Women who smiled while they measured you and found you insufficient, and never once had to raise their voice to make you feel it. She was not going to unravel because of it. She had more practice than that. What she hadn't accounted for was that Vivian Carlyle had more reach than she did. She found out that same night. She was setting the table for dinner when Nathaniel came in from the barn with mud on his boots and something tight around his jaw that had nothing to do with the weather. "Rios told me something," he said. She looked at him. "Go ahead." "Mercer was in town today, talking to people." He pulled his hat off and held it by the brim. "Saying you pushed yourself into this arrangement, that you misrepresented yourself in the letters, that you're—" He stopped. "That I'm what," she said, "that you're here because you had no other choice, and you manipulated a lonely man into taking you in." He said it flat and plain, because he was not a man who softened things by dressing them up. "I want you to hear that from me, instead of from someone else." She stood with the plates in her hands, and she breathed. "And what do you think?" she said. "I think Mercer's a man who doesn't like things he can't control," Nathaniel said. "And I think you being here takes something from him he figured was eventually going to be his. So he's doing what men like that do." "You didn't answer the question," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I think you're the most competent person who's been in this house since Clara. And I think that scares certain people who were comfortable with me being incompetent and alone." She put the plates on the table, carefully. "Vivian Carlyle," she said. His jaw tightened just slightly. "She came to talk to me in town today," Maggie said. "She was very polite about it." "She's always very polite about things," he said. "How long has she been waiting for you?" Maggie asked. A long pause. "I never gave her reason to," he said. "I want that to be clear." "I'm not accusing you of anything," Maggie said. "I'm asking because I want to understand the shape of what I walked into, that's all." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "After Clara died, Vivian brought food over. A lot of people did at first. She kept coming after the others stopped. I thanked her. I never—" He stopped. "I thought she understood." "She understood what she wanted to understand," Maggie said. "That's what people do." He looked at her. "People," she said, "hear what they're hoping for, even when the words are saying something different." He was quiet for a beat. Then, Is that what happened with you? Someone said something different than what you heard. She met his eyes. I always heard exactly what people meant, she said. That was the problem. She turned back to the stove. Behind her, he didn't move for a moment. Then he said quietly, Not here, Maggie. Not what I mean. She did not answer, but her hands stilled on the pot handle just for a second. Just long enough. Dinner was quieter than usual that night, but not with the bad kind of quiet. The ranch hands talked among themselves, and Nathaniel ate, and she served and watched and thought in the background of everything about what it meant to be in a place where someone said, not what I mean, and she actually believed them. She had not believed someone in a long time. She was not entirely sure what to do with it. The next morning, Patrick McKee appeared at the kitchen door before breakfast, looking like a man who has done something he wants to confess before he has to eat. Ma'am, he said, I need to tell you something. She looked up from the dough. Come in then. He came in holding his hat, the same way Nathaniel held his when he was saying something uncomfortable, and she thought they picked that up from each other. These men, the way they stand when words get hard. Walsh, McKee said. He's been talking. In town at the saloon. Saying things about you and Mr. Brooks. About how the arrangement got made. Making it sound like... He stopped, tried again. Like you came here because you had something to gain, and he got taken advantage of. She kept her hands moving in the dough. How long has this been going on? Started about a week ago, he said. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry. Does Mr. Brooks know? McKee looked at his boots. I think Rios was going to tell him this morning. She nodded. Thank you for telling me, Patrick. He looked up. She almost never used their first names. He noticed. Yes, ma'am. Eat something before you go out, she said. There's biscuits. I took 3, which told her everything she needed to know about how nervous he'd been. Nervous men ate more than they meant to. Nathaniel came in from the barn an hour later, and she already had the kettle on, and she already knew what was coming. She could read the set of his shoulders from across the kitchen. Walsh, he said. I heard, she said. I'll handle it. I know you will, she said. That's not what I want to talk about. He stopped. What do you want to talk about? She turned and faced him. I want to talk about what happens when handling it doesn't stop it. Mercer has money. Vivian has standing. Walsh is just a ranch hand repeating what he hears because that's what men do when they spend too much time at saloons. But Mercer and Vivian, they're not going to stop Nathaniel. Not because you close doors in their faces. He looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to know if this is something you're prepared for, she said. Because I can do the work. I can manage the house. I can keep the books. I can make the dinners and fix the latches and figure out the root cellar insulation. That part. She gestured at the kitchen, the house. Everything. That part I know how to do. I've always known how to do it. She stopped. But this other part. The part where people in this town decide what my presence here means. I need to know if you're going to hold the line on that. Because if you're not, if you get tired of it, or embarrassed by it, or if one day Mercer says the right thing, and you start to wonder if maybe they have a point. Maggie, he said. I need to know, she said. I've been let go of before. I can survive it. But I'd rather know now than later. The kitchen was very still. He walked to the table. He did not sit. He put both hands flat on the surface and looked at her from across it. After Clara died. He said, Mercer came to me with an offer on this land. A good offer. Fair price. More than fair. He paused. I told him no. He came back 6 months later with a better offer. I told him no again. He's been finding ways to undermine this ranch ever since, because a man like Mercer doesn't hear no without deciding the person who said it is his enemy. I didn't know that, she said. You didn't ask, he said. But here's what I want you to understand. I've been holding this line against Clayton Mercer for 3 years. Before you got here. I didn't bring you here and then decide to hold the line. The line was already there. He lifted his hands off the table, straightened. You being here just gave him a new angle. That's all this is. She looked at him. You're not the problem, he said. You're the reminder that his angle isn't working. She breathed. All right, she said. All right, he said. Now can we handle Walsh? Fire him or keep him, she said. He blinked. What? Mercer's probably paying him, she said. Or Vivian is. Either way, he's not just talking because he's foolish. If you fire him, he becomes someone with a grudge and more time to spread stories. If you keep him, you can watch what he hears and what he carries out of this ranch. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. That is either very smart, he said, or very cold. It's both, she said. Welcome to being a woman who spent her life being underestimated. He stared at her. She turned back to the stove. Behind her, she heard him pull out the chair and sit down. And she heard the quiet exhale of a man who has just encountered something he didn't expect and is deciding whether to be unsettled by it or impressed. He kept Walsh. Walsh was quieter after that, for reasons she figured had to do with a conversation Nathaniel had with him that she was not present for and did not ask about. Whatever was said, it was enough. Walsh did his work, ate his meals, and kept his opinions to himself in her presence. Rios, who missed nothing, caught her eye across the table 2 evenings later and gave her the small nod of a man signaling understanding. She gave him the same back. They never discussed it. The winter market announcement came the second week of November. Every year, Red Hollow held a winter market on the main street in the week before Thanksgiving. Local businesses and ranching families sold goods, preserved foods, crafts. It was the social event of the season. The whole county came. Nathaniel had not participated in years. You should have a table, Maggie told him over breakfast. He looked at her over his coffee. For what? I've been putting up preserves since I got here, she said. I made enough to sell. And there are the beeswax candles, and if I have 3 weeks, I can make enough dried herb bundles to fill a table. You've been making candles. I found your wife's bee boxes in the shed, she said. There was enough wax left to work with. I hope that was all right. He went very still. She realized a half-second too late that she had wandered into territory she hadn't mapped yet. She kept her voice even. If you'd rather I didn't touch them. No, he said. Quiet. No, she would have. Clara would have liked that. He paused. She used to sell at the market. Every year. The kitchen was quiet. I don't have to, Maggie said. Yes, you do, he said. It's a good idea. He looked at his coffee. It was always a good idea. I just didn't have anybody to do it. She nodded and let it settle and did not press because she understood that some rooms you step into carefully and let the person decide how much light to let in. She spent the next 2 weeks building inventory. Preserves, blackberry, choke, cherry, wild plum. Beeswax candles in 3 sizes. Dried herb bundles tied with cotton string. A half-dozen jars of rendered tallow for cooking and lamp oil. The ranch hands watched this production with visible curiosity. Rios, who was precise about everything, started helping her organize the jars without being asked. She let him and said nothing about it. McKee asked her one afternoon while she was tying herb bundles at the kitchen table, "Do you need me to build you another shelf?" She looked at him. "Can you build a shelf?" "My father was a carpenter," he said. "Then yes," she said. "I need 2. He built 3. They were good shelves." She told him so, and he looked like she'd given him something he didn't know he was hungry for. Walsh watched all of this from a careful distance. She watched him watching and noted it and said nothing. The night before the market, Nathaniel came to find her in the kitchen where she was boxing the last of the preserves. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're going to be there tomorrow," he said. "In town, at the market." "That's generally how markets work," she said. "People are going to look at me," she said. "Say things, wonder what you were thinking." She folded the lid on the box and straightened and looked at him directly. "I know. I've been knowing that since I got off the train." "I'm going to be there," he said. "Standing at that table." "You don't have to." "I'm going to be there," he said again. Firm. Final. Not a reassurance. A statement of what was already decided. She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. He nodded, turned to go. "Nathaniel." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "Not for any specific thing. For the whole of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Get some sleep," he said. "Market opens at 7. The morning of the market was cold and clear, and the whole town of Red Hollow turned out the way. Small towns turned out for things which was completely and without shame about their own curiosity. Wagons lined Main Street. The smell of wood smoke and roasted corn and fresh bread moved through the cold air. Children ran between the tables. Merchants called out to people they knew. Maggie set up the Canyon Creek table, while Nathaniel helped carry the boxes from the wagon, and she arranged everything with the same quiet system she brought to every task: preserves at the front where the colors could be seen, candles in graduated height, herb bundles fanned out at the back. Clean lines. Nothing wasted. People walked by and looked. Some kept walking. Some stopped. The first sale was a jar of chokecherry preserve. To a woman she didn't know who picked it up, held it to the light and said, "Lord, look at the color on that." She bought 2 jars and a candle. The second sale was to a ranching family from the north edge of the county who bought 6 jars of wild plum and asked if she took orders. "I can discuss an order," she said. They discussed it. She took the order. By mid-morning the table was down by a third, and she was beginning to calculate whether she had priced the candles correctly, which she had not. She had underpriced them. She realized watching how quickly people picked them up when she became aware of a stillness in the immediate vicinity of the table. The kind of stillness that happens when someone has arrived who changes the energy of a space. She looked up. Clayton Mercer was standing 6 feet away, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with the particular expression of a man who has come to confirm something. He was well-dressed, well-fed, and wearing the patience of a man who had never been forced to hurry anything. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Mr. Mercer," she said. She did not stop what she was doing. "Quite the operation you've set up here," he said, looking over the table. "Thank you," she said. Neutral. "Of course," he said. "It does raise questions. A woman in your situation building all of this rather quickly. People wonder about the motivations." She set down the preserve jar she was repositioning and looked at him. "People," she said, "can wonder whatever they like. What people buy and what people say are different things, and right now I'm more interested in the first." Mercer smiled. It didn't reach anything behind it. "I'm just concerned about Nathaniel," he said. "He's a good man, a private man. Men like that are sometimes—" a pause calibrated. "Taken advantage of by people who need something they can provide." "Like land," she said. The smile stayed on his face. The warmth in it, what little there was, did not. "I don't know what you mean by that," he said. "I think you do," she said. "I think when a man makes 2 offers on a piece of land and gets turned down both times, and then spends 3 years finding ways to undermine the man who turned him down. We're not talking about concern. We're talking about something else entirely." The silence between them was short and sharp. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's an observation," she said. "Based on what I've been told by people who know the history." She picked up the preserve jar again. "Is there something I can sell you, Mr. Mercer? Or were you just passing through?" He looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man recalculating. Then he tipped his hat, a minimal, careful gesture, and walked away. She watched him go. From behind her, Nathaniel said quietly, "I've been wanting to say that to him for 3 years." She had not heard him come up. She kept her eyes on the direction Mercer had walked. "Why didn't you?" "Because men like that have lawyers," he said, "and long memories." "So do women like me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then she heard it. Not just the almost sound, not the shadow of a thing. An actual, real, full-weight laugh. Brief and low and real, the laugh of a man who has been surprised into it, who didn't see it coming, and didn't try to stop it. She turned around. Howe was looking at her, and his face was different in this moment than she had seen it. Not the working face, not the careful face, not the face that managed and assessed and held the line. Something in it was open, just for a moment. Just enough. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. But he was still looking at her. Vivian Carlyle appeared at the table at noon. Maggie had expected it. She had expected it with the specific tired foreknowledge of a woman who has learned that when a thing is going to happen, it tends to happen at the most inconvenient moment possible, which was when the table was busiest and Nathaniel had stepped away to talk to an old rancher he knew. Vivian looked at the table, at the remaining stock, at the order book where Maggie had been writing names. "You've done well," Vivian said. Something genuine and something else underneath. "It's a good day for selling," Maggie said. "Nathaniel hasn't brought goods to the market since Clara died," Vivian said. Her voice was very careful. 3 years. "I know," Maggie said. "You know." Vivian looked at her. "You've been here 6 weeks. 7, Maggie said. "And he told me himself." Something shifted in Vivian's face. Something that was Maggie realized not entirely what she had labeled it. Not just vanity or spite or territorial instinct. Something that was actually underneath everything sadness. She looked at Vivian Carlyle with her beautiful Tuesday dress and her careful smile and her 3 years of bringing food to a house that didn't know how to receive it, and she thought, this woman loves him. Actually, loves him. And he never saw it, and she never knew how to say it, and now I'm here, and it's too late, and she doesn't know what to do with that. It didn't change anything. It couldn't. But it made Maggie's voice when she spoke come out without any edge in it. "Miss Carlyle," she said, "I didn't come here to take anything from you." Vivian looked at her. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go and he had a spare room," Maggie said. "That's the truth of it. Whatever happened after—" She stopped. "I didn't plan it. I don't think he did either." A long silence. "No," Vivian said finally. "No, I don't suppose he did." She looked at the table again, picked up a candle, turned it in her hands. "Clara made candles," she said. "I used her equipment," Maggie said. Vivian set the candle down. "I'll take 2 jars of the wild plumage," she said. "And the candle." She opened her purse. Maggie wrapped them without ceremony. Vivian paid. She started to turn, then stopped. "You should know," she said without turning back, "that Mercer's been talking to Judge Harlan about the legality of the arrangement, whether it constitutes he's calling it a fraudulent claim on the property." Maggie went very still. "He doesn't have grounds," Vivian continued, still not turning. "But he's going to try to make grounds. He's that kind of man." A pause. "I thought you should know." She walked away. Maggie stood at the table with the order book in her hands, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she thought, all right. Now it's something else. When Nathaniel came back 20 minutes later, she was selling the last of the beeswax candles with the same steady efficiency she brought to everything. And she did not tell him immediately, because there were still customers, and there was still business, and she was not a woman who let things fall apart in public. But when the table was sold down to the last 3 jars, and the crowd had thinned, and the afternoon light had gone gray and cold over Main Street, she turned to him and said simply and directly, "Mercer's been to Judge Harlan. He's building a case. I don't know exactly what case, but Vivian told me, and I believe her." Nathaniel went very still. "He's claiming fraud," she said. "The arrangement. He's calling it a fraudulent claim on the property somehow. I don't know the legal specifics." Nathaniel looked down the street in the direction Mercer had gone. His jaw was set. His hands at his sides were not fists, but they were close. "He's been waiting for an angle," Nathaniel said. "And now he has one," she said. He looked at her. "You knew this was coming." "I thought something like it might," she said. "Men who want land don't stop wanting it because you said no. You could have warned me." "I am warning you," she said. "Right now." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something move through him that wasn't anger exactly. Something deeper. Something that had been building since before she arrived, and was now because of her presence being forced into the open, whether he was ready or not. "I'm not sorry you're here," he said, straight and plain. "I want that clear. Whatever he does, I'm not sorry." She held his gaze. "Even if it costs you." "He's been costing me," Nathaniel said, "for 3 years. At least now I've got something worth defending." The sentence landed in her chest and stayed there. She looked away first. At the empty table. At the order book full of names. At the last 3 jars of preserve catching the cold late light. "We should head back," she said. "It'll be dark by the time we reach the ranch." "Maggie," he said. She looked at him. "You heard what I said," he said, not a question. "I heard it," she said. She picked up the order book and put it in the box and started breaking down the table, and he came around and helped. And neither of them spoke about it again that evening, but it sat between them in the wagon on the ride home, solid and warm and real, the way things sit when they have been said and cannot be unsaid. She looked up at the Wyoming stars. She thought about Mercer and Judge Harlan and fraudulent claims and 3 years of a man holding a line. She thought about something worth defending. She pressed her hands flat on her knees in the cold dark of the wagon, and she thought, if he is going to fight for this, then so am I. Whatever it costs, so am I. The ride home from the market was quiet, but it was not the comfortable quiet they had built over 7 weeks. It was the quiet of two people sitting next to each other, with something large and unspoken between them, something that had a name neither of them was ready to say out loud yet. Mercer, Judge Harlan, fraudulent claim. Maggie turned the words over in her mind the whole way back to the ranch, the way you turn a stone over, looking for what's underneath it. She was not afraid of a fight. She had never been afraid of a fight. What she was afraid of, the thing she had always been afraid of, the thing she had built her entire careful interior architecture around protecting herself from, was being the reason someone else lost something they loved. She had been that before, not through malice. Never through malice. Just through existing in spaces where her existence cost people something they weren't willing to pay. She had promised herself somewhere in the gray middle of the Denver winter, after Thomas Aldridge's parlor, that she would never be that again. That she would only go where she was genuinely wanted and genuinely useful, and where her presence was a gain and not a liability. And now Clayton Mercer was going to Judge Harlan, and Nathaniel had said something worth defending and meant it. She believed he meant it, but meaning something and being willing to pay the full price of it were two different things, and she had learned the hard way that the distance between those two things was exactly where people got lost. She helped put the wagon away. She went inside. She made a late supper from what was left in the kitchen cornbread and the last of the morning's beans, and they ate, and she was quiet, and he watched her being quiet and did not push, and that was something she thought, that he knew when not to push. After the dishes, she said good night and went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and did what she always did when something needed thinking through. She got very still and she thought it through, all of it, start to finish, without flinching from any of it. By the time she lay down, she had not resolved anything, but she had looked at it clearly, which was the first step. She fell asleep with her hands folded on her stomach and her eyes on the ceiling, and the word defending sitting in her chest like something that had taken root. 3 days later, Judge Harlan's clerk rode out to the ranch. She saw him coming from the kitchen window. Young man, official looking, riding with the particular posture of someone carrying paper authority. She did not go to the door. She stayed in the kitchen and listened to Nathaniel's voice in the front room, low and controlled, and the clerk's voice higher and more nervous. When the clerk left and Nathaniel came to the kitchen doorway, she already had his coffee poured. He took it. He sat down. He put a folded paper on the table between them. "He's filed a formal inquiry," Nathaniel said. "Claims the marriage arrangement was conducted under false pretenses. That you misrepresented your circumstances and your intentions in correspondence, and that the arrangement constitutes a means of acquiring property rights to Canyon Creek Ranch." She looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. "Property rights," she said. "We're not married yet," he said. "Legally. We announced the arrangement, but the ceremony hasn't happened." He paused. "He's trying to stop it from happening. If he can get the judge to find cause, he can delay it long enough to—" "To what end?" she said. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "My land note comes due in February. I've been managing it, but it's been tight. If there's a legal challenge pending, the bank gets nervous. Nervous banks call notes early." He looked at her. "Mercer knows exactly what he's doing." Maggie sat very still. "He's not coming after me," she said. "He's using me to come after you." "Yes. And if I left," she said carefully, "the inquiry would lose its basis." The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. It felt longer. "Don't," Nathaniel said. I'm thinking out loud, she said. Don't think out loud in that direction, he said. It's not a solution. It might be the cleanest one, she said. For who? He said. For Mercer, because that's the only person it would be clean for. She looked at the paper on the table. She thought about the banknote in February. She thought about 3 years of a man holding a line alone. She thought about what it would cost him if that line finally broke, not because of anything he'd done wrong, but because she had walked in through the front door and handed his enemy a new weapon. If the bank calls the note, she said, you lose the ranch. I know what happens if the bank calls the note, he said. Nathaniel. She made herself say it plainly. If you lose this ranch because of me. If I lose this ranch, he said, it will be because Clayton Mercer has been trying to take it for 3 years, and he finally found an angle that worked. That's not you, that's him. The angle is me, she said. The angle, he said, is that I finally have something that makes me look like a man worth attacking, instead of a man worth waiting out. He set his coffee down. There's a difference. She stared at him. He stared back. I'm going to talk to Harlan directly, he said, before Mercer gets to shape the whole picture. I know Harlan. He's a fair man. He's not going to move on something without real cause, and there is no real cause here because you didn't misrepresent a single thing. He doesn't know me, she said. He will, Nathaniel said. You're coming with me. She opened her mouth. You're coming with me, he said again, with the quiet finality of a man who has made the calculation and is not interested in relitigating it. You're not going to sit here while someone tells a story about you to a judge without you in the room. She closed her mouth. Friday, he said. We go to town Friday. He picked up the paper and folded it and put it in his coat pocket and pushed back from the table and went out to the barn, and she sat at the kitchen table alone with her coffee, going cold, and thought about a man who 3 years ago had turned down money twice rather than surrender what was his, and was apparently prepared to do it a third time, this time for a woman he had known for 7 weeks. She did not know what to do with that. She was still figuring it out when Calhoun appeared at the kitchen door that afternoon, which was unusual because Calhoun did not generally appear anywhere without cause. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and looked at her with the calm of a man who has seen a great deal and stopped being surprised by most of it. You heard, she said. Ranch is small, Calhoun said. Sound carries. Come in then, she said. He came in. He sat down in the chair across from her that had become, without anyone deciding it, Nathaniel's chair, and he set his hat on the table and folded his hands and looked at her with the patient directness of a man who does not use more words than he needs. I've worked this ranch 11 years, he said. Worked it under Nathaniel's father before him. I was here when Clara came, and I was here when she went. He paused. I've watched this man hold this place together through drought and bad cattle prices, and a neighbor who wants what isn't his. I've watched him do it alone for 3 years, and I've watched him go quieter and smaller every year he did it. She did not say anything. Then you came, Calhoun said, and inside 2 weeks the kitchen smelled like food again, and the smokehouse latch was fixed, and those boys at the dinner table stopped eating like it was medicine. He paused. I'm telling you this so you understand what you are here, in case you're sitting at that table thinking about doing something foolish. Like leaving, she said. Like leaving, he said. She looked at her hands. He doesn't need me to fight Mercer, she said. No, Calhoun said. He can fight Mercer. He's been doing it. He paused. What he needed was a reason the fight was still worth having. He picked up his hat. That's you. He left. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. Then she got up and started making dinner because the ranch hands needed to eat, and the world did not stop for anyone's crisis. And while she worked, she made herself think about it honestly, the way she made herself do everything clearly without flinching, looking at every angle. She was the reason the fight had a new dimension. That was true. She was also possibly the thing that made the fight winnable. That was also true. She had been running her whole life from being too much. She had spent years making herself smaller, quieter, less present, less demanding, less everything, so that people would not have to decide. The cost of her was more than they wanted to pay. Nathaniel Brooks had looked at the cost and said something worth defending. If she left now, she wasn't protecting him. She was just proving one more time that she didn't believe anyone who said it. She put the skillet on the stove. She decided. Friday they went to town. Judge Harlan's office was above the land registry on the main street. I was a man in his late 60s, with a face like weathered hardwood, and the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades listening to people tell him things they wanted him to believe. He looked at Maggie when she came in, the way he probably looked at everything calmly directly, without telegraphing his conclusions before he had them. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Judge Harlan," she said. She sat down in the chair he indicated without waiting to be asked twice. Nathaniel sat beside her. "Mr. Mercer has filed a formal inquiry," Harlan said. "He had the papers on his desk. He did not perform with them. He claims the arrangement between yourself and Mr. Brooks was conducted under misrepresentation. Specifically that you concealed your financial circumstances and your intention to acquire property rights through the marriage." "I'd like to see the specific language," she said. Harlan looked at her. Then he turned the papers and slid them across the desk. She read them. All of them. Carefully. She could feel Nathaniel beside her, not moving, not speaking, giving her the space to do this, and she was grateful for it. She set the papers back on the desk. "The letter I sent to Mr. Brooks," she said. "I can produce it. It states clearly what I can provide and what I expect. There is no misrepresentation in it. Mr. Mercer claims the letter was crafted to present a false picture of your intentions," Harlan said. "My intention," she said, "was to find a place where I could work honestly and build something real. I stated that plainly. I made no claims about property. I made no claims about permanent standing. I offered my skills and my labor, and I said so clearly." She paused. "What Mr. Mercer is calling misrepresentation is, as far as I can determine, simply the fact that I arrived and the arrangement worked out to everyone's benefit except his." Harlan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathaniel. "You have no concerns about the nature of the arrangement as entered into?" "None," Nathaniel said. "It's been exactly what it looked like from the start. Honest work and honest intention from both sides." "The property acquisition claim," Maggie said. "I want to be clear about something, Judge. I have no legal interest in this property. We are not yet married. I am currently employed as a household manager. That is the current legal status of the arrangement." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Mercer is challenging something that doesn't yet exist in law, which suggests the challenge isn't really about what has happened. It's about preventing what might." Harlan looked at her again with that same calibrated stillness. "You're not wrong," he said after a moment. "Then I'd ask," she said, "that you consider whether this inquiry has legal standing or whether it is a mechanism being used to create financial pressure on Mr. Brooks through the bank ahead of his February note." The office was very quiet. Harlan looked at his papers. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Maggie. "I'll need a week," he said. "I'm not dismissing the inquiry, but I'm not advancing it either until I've looked at it more carefully." He gathered the papers. "I'd ask you both to stay available." "We're not going anywhere," Nathaniel said. They rode back to the ranch in a cold wind that had picked up since morning, and Nathaniel was quiet for the first part of the ride, and she let him be quiet. Then he said, "You handled that better than I would have." "You would have been angrier," she said. "Yes," he said. "Anger doesn't work on men like Harlan," she said. "He's a reasonable man. He responds to reason." "You figured that out in about 30 seconds, he said. "I've been reading rooms my whole life," she said. "You learn." He was quiet again. Then, "What you said about Mercer using you to get to me about the bank and the note. How did you know about that specifically?" "I didn't," she said. "I guessed. A man like Mercer doesn't go to a judge for justice. He goes to a judge for leverage. The leverage had to be financial because that's where you're most exposed." She paused. "The note comes due in February. I saw the ledger." He looked at her. "You read the ledger," he said. "You showed it to me yourself," she said. "You said it was mine to manage." "I meant the household accounts." "The household is part of the ranch," she said. "The ranch accounts affect the household." It seemed relevant. He was quiet for a moment, and she braced herself for the conversation about boundaries and appropriate limits and what was and wasn't her business. "You're right," he said. She blinked. "The note," he said. "It's tighter than I made it sound the other night. I've been managing it month by month. If the bank gets nervous and calls it early..." He stopped. "It's tight." "How tight?" she said. He told her the number. She did not react visibly. She had learned a long time ago to receive hard numbers without letting them see you absorb the impact. "All right," she said. "Can I look at the full ledger, not just the household side?" He looked at her. "I've kept accounts before," she said. "For the boarding house in Denver. 2 years. The woman who ran it let me manage the books when she got sick." She paused. "Let me look at it. I might see something." "You might see how bad it is," he said. "I've already seen how bad it is," she said. "You just told me the number." He was quiet. "Nathaniel," she said, "let me help. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm actually here for, not just the biscuits and the smokehouse latch. Let me do the thing I'm capable of doing." He looked at the road ahead. "When we get back," he said. "After supper. I'll get the ledger." She nodded. She looked at the road too, and she thought, all right. Now we're getting somewhere. The full ledger was worse than the number had suggested, and better than her worst fear. She sat at the kitchen table after supper, while the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse, and Nathaniel sat across from her, and she went through it page by page with the kind of focused patience she brought to things that mattered. He watched her read. He did not speak. She appreciated that. She found 3 places where the accounting had errors, not fraud, not incompetence. Just the small accumulated mistakes of a man doing his own books when he'd rather be working the land. She found 2 expenses that could be renegotiated. She found 1 supplier who was overcharging by enough to matter. She also found on the second to last page a notation in different handwriting. Smaller. Neater. Clara's she understood without asking. A record of the market sales. 3 years old. The last entry was dated the November before Clara died. She kept her face still and kept reading. When she finished, she closed the ledger and pressed her hands flat on the cover. "If we renegotiate the Granger supply contract," she said, "and if the market sales continue at today's rate, I took 4 orders, not counting what we sold outright, we can build enough buffer by February to weather the bank even if they get nervous." She paused. "But there can't be any unexpected losses between now and then." "Define unexpected," he said. "Legal fees," she said. "If Harlan advances the inquiry and we need a lawyer." His jaw tightened. "We need to know that number before we can plan around it," she said. "Is there someone in town?" "Beecham," he said. "He's decent." "Talk to him Monday," she said. "Find out what we're looking at." "All right," he said. She opened the ledger again to the Granger contract page. "And this..." "I know," he said. "I've known the contract was soft for 2 years. I just didn't..." He stopped. "Didn't have time," she said. "Or energy, after doing everything else." "Something like that," he said. She looked at him. He looked tired in this light. Not the physical tired of a man who'd worked a long day. He wore that easily. It sat on him like something familiar and manageable. This was the other kind. The kind that came from years of holding something alone and never fully being able to put it down. "You've been carrying this by yourself for 3 years, she said. "I've been carrying this ranch for 3 years, he said. "Yes." "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said. He looked at her. "I know that's..." She stopped. Tried again. "I know you don't need me to say it, but I'm saying it. You don't have to do it alone." The kitchen was quiet. "Clara used to say..." He started, then stopped. "You can tell me about her," Maggie said quietly. "You don't have to protect me from her." He looked at her for a long moment. "She used to say I didn't know how to receive help," he said. "That I was so used to being the one who held things that I didn't know what to do when someone tried to hold something for me." "Was she right?" Maggie asked. "Always." "Always," he said. "She was almost always right." "Good," Maggie said. "Then learn from that." Something crossed his face, not the almost smile. Something deeper and less protected than that. "You're not much like I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "Someone quieter." "I can be quiet," she said. "I don't want you to be," he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze for a moment that was longer than it needed to be for anything practical, and she felt something shift in the room, in the air between them, the way pressure shifts before a change in weather. Then he looked at the ledger. "Monday," he said. "Beecham." "Monday," she said. She closed the ledger. She got up to make tea because she needed something to do with her hands, and he stayed at the table, and neither of them spoke about the other thing. The thing that was in the room now, as clearly as the stove and the table and the cold Wyoming night outside the window. Some things she had learned got stronger for not being spoken too soon. She let it be. She gave him his tea. She sat back down. They went through the Granger contract page by page in the lamplight, and she made notes in the margin in her careful hand, and his shoulder was close enough to hers, across the corner of the table, that she could feel the warmth of him, and she let herself notice that, and did not immediately file it away. Progress, she thought. Small progress, but real. The next morning, she was at the stove at sunrise, same as always, and he came down the stairs, same as always, and she handed him his coffee without turning around. Same as always, and he sat down at the table, same as always. And then he said, "I wrote to Beecham last night. I'm not waiting until Monday." She turned around. "I sent Rios into town at first light," he said. Letter went with him. She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. "I figured," he said, "we shouldn't wait on something important than to hand a disgruntled man to Clayton Mercer with a grievance and extra time on his hands." But she had watched him the way she watched everything, with the patient sideways attention of a woman who had learned early that the things that undid you were never the things that came straight at you. Walsh was careful. She would give him that. He said nothing in her presence, nothing at the table, nothing she could point to directly. But 3 weeks after the market, Rios came to her in the kitchen with a face that was very controlled, in the way of a man controlling something specific. "I need to tell you something," Rios said, "and I need you to not say where you heard it." "All right," she said. "Walsh has been meeting Mercer's man," Rios said. "Not Mercer himself. A man named Dalloway who works his property. Meeting him Tuesday evenings at the edge of the north pasture." He paused. "I don't know what's being said, but I've seen it 3 times. She was quiet for a moment. "Does Nathaniel know?" she said. "I came to you first," Rios said. She thought about that. About why he had come to her first. About what it meant that these men, these 4 quiet, watchful men who had worked this land for years, were starting to route certain things through her instead of around her. "You did right," she said. "I'll handle it." Rios nodded. He started to go. She said, "Miguel." He turned. "Thank you," she said. He nodded again, and the nod was real, and he went back to work. She handled it the way she had handled everything, directly, without performance, with the minimum of words needed. She went out to the barn that afternoon where Walsh was working, and she said simply and quietly, "I know about Dalloway." Walsh went still. "I'm not going to tell you what I know specifically," she said, "because I don't need you to know how much I know. But I want to be clear. Whatever you've been passing along, the time for passing it is over. Starting now." Walsh stared at her. "If you're being paid for it," she said, "take whatever money you have left and consider it paid for something that's done." She paused. "If you're doing it out of something else, loyalty to people you thought were worth being loyal to, I'd ask you to think hard about whether those people have ever done a single thing for you in return." He was very still. "This ranch," she said, "pays fair. The work is honest. The meals are good." She looked at him directly. "That's more than most men get. I'd think about whether you want to keep having it." She walked back to the house. She did not know if it would hold. She did not know if Walsh had enough self-interest to outweigh whatever Mercer was paying him. She was gambling on the basic human preference for comfort and stability over abstract loyalty to someone who held power over you, she found out. It had worked when 2 days later, Walsh came to supper and sat down without the careful distance he'd been maintaining and ate his meal. And when she refilled his coffee, he said quietly, not looking up, "Thank you, ma'am." Just that. She poured the coffee and moved on and said nothing about it. Rios caught her eye across the table. She gave him the small nod. He gave it back. Nathaniel noticed none of this, or if he noticed it, he chose not to ask. She respected that. Some things got done better without being made official. The letter from Judge Harlan came on a Tuesday 2.5 weeks after the meeting in his office. She was alone in the kitchen when the clerk wrote up the same young man as before. This time she went to the door. He handed her the letter. He looked at her with the expression of a person who knows the contents and is uncertain how they will be received. "Is Mr. Brooks available?" he asked. "He's in the north pasture," she said. "I can receive this." The clerk hesitated. "I can receive this," she said again, steady. He handed it over. She waited until he'd ridden away to open it. She read it standing on the porch in the cold, and she read it twice, and the second time, she let out a breath that she had been holding, she realized, for weeks. Harlan had found no legal grounds to advance the inquiry. He had written in the careful formal language of a man who meant every word exactly that the arrangement between Miss Margaret Holloway and Mr. Nathaniel Brooks appeared to have been entered into in good faith by both parties, that no evidence of misrepresentation had been established, and that the filing had been reviewed and set aside. Set aside. She folded the letter. She stood on the porch and looked at the land, the long, cold reach of it, the hills, the fence lines, the smoke from the bunkhouse chimney, the barn where she could hear faintly the sound of Calhoun moving between the stalls, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in a long time. Relief. Real physical, thorough relief. The kind that comes when a thing you have been braced against simply moves. She let herself feel it for exactly the time it took to breathe in and breathe out fully once. Then she thought about Mercer. Because Mercer was not the kind of man who accepted a set-aside. He was the kind of man who regrouped. And whatever he regrouped with was going to be harder and more direct than a legal inquiry, because the legal inquiry had cost him leverage, and men like that did not accept the loss of leverage gracefully. She was thinking through the shape of what came next when she heard boots on the frozen ground. Nathaniel coming up from the direction of the pasture, hat pushed back, the quick stride of a man who'd been told something was waiting. Rios must have ridden out to find him. He came through the gate and looked at her standing on the porch with the letter in her hand, and his face asked the question before he did. She held out the letter. He took it. He read it. He read it again. He looked up. "It's over," he said. "The inquiry is over," she said. "Mercer isn't." He absorbed that. "No," he said. "He isn't." "He's going to come at this differently now," she said. "More directly. I don't know exactly what form it takes, but it won't be a judge." She paused. "He's a man who's used to getting what he wants. The only thing that stops men like that is making the cost of wanting it higher than the gain." "How do we do that?" he said. "We make this ranch so clearly, visibly, publicly solid," she said, "that attacking it looks like what it is, a man trying to steal from people who built something real." She paused. "We finish the market season. We close the supply contract renegotiation. We pay the February note on time and in full, and we do it in public where people see it." She looked at him. "We make it obvious to every person in this county that Canyon Creek Ranch is not going anywhere." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Since the market," she said. "Since before the inquiry," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "Then, you were already thinking about how to win when you were still deciding whether to stay." She met his eyes. "I decided to stay the night you told me it might be more than a spare room," she said. The strategy came after. Something moved in his face. Something that was not the almost laugh and not the open look from the market. Something quieter and more serious than either of those things. Something that had the weight of a decision in it. He folded the letter. He put it in his coat pocket. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "Mercer came to the ranch this morning," he said, "while you were in town with the order book." She went very still. "I was going to tell you tonight," he said, "but you should know now." He looked at her directly. "He made me an offer, not for the land this time." "For what?" she said. For you to leave, he said. He offered me money, directly, to send you back and end the arrangement. He paused. A significant amount. She felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the Wyoming weather. He offered you money, she said, to get rid of me. Yes, Nathaniel said. The silence was very complete. And, she said. She made herself ask it because she needed to know, because not knowing would be worse, because she had always believed in looking at things clearly. He looked at her steadily. I told him. He said to get off my land and not come back. She breathed. And then I came to find you, he said, because you had the Harlan letter, and I needed you to know that whatever Mercer does next, he already knows that answer. He's not going to try that again. She pressed her hands flat on the porch railing. He's going to try something else, she said. Yes, Nathaniel said. Something that doesn't require my cooperation or yours, she said. Something structural. The bank, the land title, the note? Yes, he said again. She turned and looked at him. I was watching her with that expression she had filed away, and kept the one from the train platform, the one that simply paid attention without calculating. Except now it had something else in it, something that had been building in it for weeks. Whatever it is, he said quietly, we face it together. That's what I'm telling you. She looked at him for a long time. You sure? She said. Not a challenge. A real question asked plainly the way she asked everything. I've been sure, he said, since the morning I came downstairs and the coffee was already on. She turned back to the door. Come inside, she said. I'll make supper and you can tell me everything he said, every word, and then we'll figure out what he's actually planning. He followed her in. The door closed behind them. Outside the wind came off the hills, cold and clean and steady, and the land sat, the way Wyoming land sat, patient and vast and entirely indifferent to the plans of men who thought they could own more of it than they'd earned. Inside, Maggie Holloway put the kettle on, and Nathaniel Brooks sat down at his kitchen table, and they got to work. She told him everything Mercer had said at the market. Every word she could remember in order, the way she always recalled things precisely without editorializing, the way you read a ledger rather than a letter. He listened the same way, without interrupting, without the restless shifting of a man who was already composing his response before she finished. He just listened, and she thought again, as she had thought many times in the weeks she'd been here, that this was a man who had learned somewhere along the way that listening was not the same as waiting to speak. When she finished, he said, the land title comment. Tell me exactly what he said. She repeated it word for word. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the title on this land has one irregularity. It's been there since my father bought it. A surveying error from 1861. The boundary on the northeast corner is off by about 40 yards. It's never mattered because the land it concerns is scrubland, no water, no grazing value. But if someone wanted to challenge the title on a technicality, it would tie up the deed, she said. Long enough for a bank to call a note, he said. She looked at him. That's his next move, she said. That's his next move, he said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, and she thought 40 yards of scrubland and 3 years of waiting, and a man who was going to keep coming, because men like that always kept coming until you made it impossible, or unprofitable, or both. Who's the county surveyor? She said. Man named Aldous Webb, he said. Been doing it 15 years. Is he honest? As far as I know. Then you need to hire him before Mercer does, she said. Have him resurvey the northeast corner and file the corrected boundary with the land registry. If the correction is on file before Mercer raises the issue, the challenge has no standing. Nathaniel stared at her. That's, he started. Simple, she said. But it needs to happen before he moves. How long does a survey take? Week, maybe 2. Then you ride to Webb's office tomorrow morning, she said. First thing. He kept looking at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I'm just... He stopped. I've been sitting with that surveying problem for 3 years, thinking it was a minor thing. It was a minor thing, she said. until someone with a reason to use it knew it was there. "How did you know to think about the title?" he said. "I read the ledger," she said. "You made a small note in the margin 2 years ago, survey boundary northeast, ask Beecham. You never followed up." He was quiet. "You were doing everything alone," she said without judgment. "Things fall through the cracks when you're doing everything alone." He looked at the table. "They do," he said. She got up to refill his coffee. "Tomorrow," she said. "Webb's office. First thing." "First thing," he said. He rode out before sunrise. She was at the stove when she heard him go. Heard the horse on the frozen ground moving away from the barn toward the road, and she stood with the coffee in her hand and thought about a man who had been sitting on a 40-yard problem for 3 years because he was too busy keeping everything else from falling apart to deal with it, and she thought this is what it costs to do it alone. Not the big failures, the small ones, the marginal notes that never get followed up, the latches that stay broken until spring, the curtains that keep letting the cold in because there was always something more urgent. She understood it completely. She had lived a version of it her entire life, so busy proving she was worth keeping around, that she never stopped to ask whether the place she was keeping herself around was worth staying in. She made breakfast for the ranch hands, and she was quiet about it, and they were quiet back, the particular quiet of men who understood something was happening and had collectively decided to keep their heads down and do their work. All except Calhoun, who sat at the end of the table and ate his eggs, and then said to no one in particular, "Ranch is going to be all right." Nobody answered, but McKee caught Maggie's eye and gave her a look that was half question and half statement, and she gave him a small nod, and that was the end of it. Nathaniel was back by mid-afternoon with Webb's commitment to begin the survey Monday. He came into the kitchen and told her, and she said good and poured him coffee, and that was the whole conversation, because some things once decided don't need to be discussed further. What needed discussing, they both knew, was the ceremony. It had been hovering at the edge of everything for weeks. The fact that they were in an arrangement that had been publicly announced and was not yet legally formalized, which meant it existed in an ambiguous middle space that was genuinely useful to someone who wanted to attack it. Harlan had found no grounds for the inquiry, but the inquiry had happened because the arrangement was incomplete. Completing it removed that particular angle permanently. She knew this. She was fairly certain he knew this. What she did not know was how to have this conversation. He solved it by having it. 3 days after the Webb ride, after supper, when the ranch hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and the kitchen was quiet, and she was covering the bread she'd made for the morning, he said from the table without preamble, "We should get married." She kept her hands on the breadcloth. She did not turn around. "That's not a very romantic proposal," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." A pause. "We should get married because it's the right thing for the ranch and the right thing for us, and because I want to, and I think you want to, and neither of us is the kind of person who benefits from waiting for something we've already decided." She turned around. He was looking at her with the steady, direct look she had come to understand as his version of laying everything on the table. "You've already decided," she said. "Weeks ago," he said. "I was waiting for the right time." "This is the right time," she said. "There's no wrong time," he said. "I just needed to say it out loud." She looked at him. "I need to tell you something first," she said. He waited. "I'm not going to be a woman who shrinks," she said. "I've spent my whole life being told I was too much, and I spent a long time trying to be less to make other people comfortable. I'm not going to do that anymore." She held his gaze. "If you marry me, you marry all of it. The ledger reading and the talking to judges and the handling Walsh and all the rest. That doesn't go away." "I know," he said. "You might find," she said, "that it's more than you expected." "Maggie," he said. I've had quiet for 3 years. It's not what I want." She breathed. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. "You'll need a ring," she said. "That's customary." "I know it's customary," he said with a faint edge that was the closest he got to indignation. "I'm just saying," she said. "I have one," he said. She stopped. He reached into his coat pocket, the same pocket where he'd put the Harlan letter. The same coat he wore every day, and set a ring on the table between them. Small, gold, simple, Not new. She looked at it. She understood immediately. Clara's, she said. No, he said. My mother's. Clara had her own. He paused. My mother was a practical woman. She would have... He stopped, started again. She would have liked you. I think she would have understood you. She reached out and picked it up. She turned it in her fingers. It was worn smooth in the way of things that have been handled over years, over a lifetime. You had this in your pocket, she said. For a while, he said. She looked at him. Put it on. Put it on, he said. Quiet, direct, not commanding, just certain. She put it on. It fit. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Something in his expression was very open in the way she had only seen once or twice, the way he had looked at the market when she'd said what she'd said to Mercer, and he had laughed. That unguarded, unmanaged version of him that she was beginning to understand was the real one, the one that existed underneath the careful working exterior. Justice of the peace is in Red Hollow, he said. Saturday. Saturday, she said. He nodded. She looked at the ring on her hand. She thought about the Denver boarding house, the church circle, Thomas Aldridge's parlor. Every room that had decided she was too much before she'd had the chance to prove she was worth keeping. She thought about a 4-line advertisement in the back of a newspaper. She thought, I did not come here looking for this. I came here looking for somewhere to be useful. And somehow I found somewhere to be real. Saturday, she said again. And this time, it settled in her chest, like something that had finally arrived at its right location. The wedding was not a production. She wore her best dress, which was dark blue wool, and which she had let out slightly at the seams 2 weeks prior, because she had not been starving herself the way she sometimes had in other places in other lives, when being smaller seemed like the price of admission. She had not let it out because she was careless. She had let it out because she had decided that her body was not something she was going to continue apologizing for. And a dress that fit properly was a small, clear declaration of that. She noticed when she put it on Saturday morning that it fit exactly right. She went downstairs and found all 4 ranch hands at the kitchen table, which was unusual for a Saturday morning when they normally slept past sunrise. They were wearing their good shirts. All 4 of them. Even Walsh. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. Rios looked at her and said simply, You look fine, ma'am. McKee nodded with the earnest sincerity of a young man who means it completely. Calhoun said nothing, but he stood up when she came in, which from Calhoun was the equivalent of a speech. Walsh said, looking at the table, You do, ma'am. You really do. She pressed her lips together for exactly 1 second. Thank you, she said. All of you. Eat your breakfast. Nathaniel came down 10 minutes later in his good coat and clean boots and a shirt she had never seen before, which meant it was a kept shirt, the kind men kept for occasions. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, Ready? Ready, she said. The justice of the peace was a small, efficient man named Mr. Colby, who had clearly married a great many people in a small room and had developed the knack for making it feel real anyway. He asked the necessary questions. They gave the necessary answers. The thing that was supposed to happen happened. When it was done, and they were standing outside on the main street of Red Hollow, with the cold air and the sound of the town going on around them. Maggie looked at the ring on her hand. Her mother's ring. His mother's ring. Now hers. And she thought, this is the most ordinary, extraordinary thing that has ever happened to me. Nathaniel said, Mrs. Brooks. She looked at him. He said it the same way Calhoun had said it that first week in the kitchen, not accidentally, not as a slip, as a statement. That'll take some getting used to, she said. You've got time, he said. She had time. The first person to congratulate them in the street was a woman she didn't know, the wife of one of the ranchers from the south end of the county who had bought 6 jars of wild plum at the market. The woman took Maggie's hand and said, Congratulations, Mrs. Brooks. The plum preserve was the best I've had in 10 years. Maggie laughed. She hadn't expected to. The woman laughed too and walked on, and Nathaniel said, Not what I expected as a wedding toast. It's a better one than most, she said. They drove back to the ranch, and there was a meal that she had not prepared. The ranch hands had made it while they were in town or something, approximating a meal, which involved a great deal of beef and not nearly enough vegetables and bread that McKee had clearly made with considerable enthusiasm and limited skill. She ate every bite. Rios had found from somewhere a bottle of decent whiskey. He poured it without ceremony and raised his cup and said, "To Canyon Creek Ranch." "To Canyon Creek Ranch," everyone said. Walsh said it too. She noticed. She noted it and put it away. That night, after the ranch hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and the kitchen was cleaned, and the house was quiet, she and Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, with the last of the whiskey and the lamp between them, and neither of them rushed anything. He told her more about Clara. Not because she asked, but because she had told him weeks ago he didn't have to protect her from it, and tonight, for whatever reason, he was ready to not protect her. Clara had been quick and funny and fearless about saying exactly what she thought he said. She had been sick for so long before the end that sometimes he forgot those years, the good years, because the last 3 had been so heavy. But there had been good years. 11 of them. Good and ordinary, and full of the kind of life he hadn't known how to rebuild after she was gone. Because rebuilding felt like replacing, Maggie said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Exactly. It's not," she said. "I want you to know I understand that. What you had with her doesn't have to be a smaller thing for this to be real. They're not competing." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're the only person who said that to me," he said. "Everyone else acted like I was supposed to either stay broken or start over as though it hadn't happened. Nobody said it could be." "Both things," she said. "Both things," he said. The lamp burned low. She thought about Vivian Carlyle standing at the market table saying Clara made candles and paying for the ones Maggie had made from Clara's wax boxes, and she thought grief is strange, and people are strange, and sometimes the most unexpected person turns out to be the one who understands. She would have fixed that root cellar herself, Nathaniel said. Eventually. "I'm sure she would have," Maggie said. "Probably faster than you," he said. She looked at him. "Probably not the chair leg, though," he said. "She had no patience for woodwork." "I have excellent patience for woodwork," Maggie said. "I know," he said. "I noticed." And there it was, again the real laugh. Brief and low and completely unguarded. She thought I could hear that every day. I would not get tired of that. She did not say it, but she thought it. The news of the marriage moved through Red Hollow with the speed that news always moved through small places, which was faster than the parties involved, and in several directions simultaneously. By Monday morning, Mrs. Farley knew. By Monday afternoon, so did most of the county. The reactions were predictably varied. The ranching family, who had placed the order at the market, sent a note of congratulations and a request for 2 additional jars of chokecherry. Maggie took this as a good sign. The note from the Hargreave family 3 miles north offered felicitations with a warmth that suggested genuine goodwill. A woman named Mrs. Preston, whose husband ran the feed supply, stopped Nathaniel in the street and told him she thought it was the finest thing he'd done in 3 years, and said it loudly enough that 3 other people heard. Clayton Mercer said nothing publicly, which was, Maggie understood, the loudest thing he could have done. A man who says nothing after a defeat is a man who is planning his next move in private. She was thinking about this on Wednesday morning when Webb came to report on the survey. I was a methodical man. Webb the kind who never offered a conclusion before he had every measurement in hand, which she respected. He sat at the kitchen table with his papers, and he walked Nathaniel through the northeast boundary correction in exact terms, and when he was done, he said the corrected filing would be at the land registry by Friday. "That fast," Nathaniel said. "I started Monday," Webb said. "It wasn't complicated. The original error was a compass deviation. Happens more than you'd think with those 1860s surveys. The correction is clean." "Thank you," Nathaniel said. "Mrs. Brooks," Webb said, nodding to her. She poured him coffee and set a plate of biscuits on the table, because she always did, and he took one and ate it, and then said almost as an afterthought, "You should know there was another inquiry at my office last week, before yours." The kitchen went quiet. "Who?" Nathaniel said. "Man representing Mercer," Webb said. "Asking about survey work in this area. I told him I had nothing pending. He looked at his coffee, which was technically true at the time. Maggie looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at her. He was already moving, Nathaniel said. You got there first, she said. By 1 day. 1 day between Mercer's inquiry and Nathaniel's. 1 day between the survey being used as a weapon and the survey being diffused. She thought about the ledger note in the margin. Survey boundary northeast, ask Beecham. 2 years old, never followed up. 1 day. She did not say anything about this. There was nothing productive to say. After Webb left, Nathaniel sat at the table for a moment, and she could see him absorbing it, how close it had been, how completely Mercer had been running a parallel strategy, how differently the last week could have looked. If you hadn't seen the margin note, he said. But I did, she said. Maggie. I did, she said. That's what matters. We were faster. He looked at her. You were faster, he said. I want to be clear about that. That was you. She held his gaze. It was both of us, she said. You rode to Webb's office. I just knew to send you. He shook his head slightly, not disagreeing exactly, more like a man who is adjusting to a new understanding of how things worked. She recognized the look. She had seen it on the faces of people who discovered she was more capable than they'd assumed, and she was accustomed to letting the adjustment happen on its own schedule without commentary. She cleared the cups from the table. February note, she said. 3 weeks away. Beecham thinks we're solid, he said. Beecham doesn't know about the Granger renegotiation yet, she said. Set up a meeting for next week. I want to be there. He looked at her. I want to be there, she said again, steady. All right, he said. You'll be there. The Beecham meeting was the following Tuesday. Attorney Beecham was a compact man of around 50 who wore his intelligence quietly and had the particular focused politeness of a man who had long since learned that the smartest person in the room was not always the loudest one. He looked at Maggie when Nathaniel introduced her, and he said, Mrs. Brooks, I've heard about you. Good things, I hope, she said. Mostly people saying they don't quite know what to make of you, he said with the ghost of a smile, which in my experience generally means someone is doing something right. She liked him immediately. They went through the ranch finances with Beecham line by line. She had reorganized the presentation of the ledger, not the numbers, just the structure, making it easier to read the actual position without wading through the disorder. Beecham looked at her reorganization, and then at her, and then went through it without comment, which she took as approval. The Granger renegotiation, when she laid it out, made Beecham sit back and look at her. You've been in contact with Granger directly, he said. I wrote to him 3 weeks ago, she said. Explained that we were reviewing all supply contracts and that we had an offer from another supplier at better terms. She paused. We didn't. But the offer was plausible enough that he wrote back within a week. Beecham looked at Nathaniel. Did you know about this? She told me she was handling it, Nathaniel said. Beecham looked back at her. And the new terms, she told him. Beecham was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's a significant improvement. Yes, she said. And it's signed. Countersigned last Friday, she said. I have the copy here. She put it on the desk between them. Beecham read it. He read it a second time. He put it down and folded his hands on the desk and looked at her with the expression of a man who is recalibrating something. Mrs. Brooks, he said. With this contract and the market revenue and the corrected survey on file, your position going into February is considerably stronger than I estimated a month ago. I know, she said. How much at, Beecham said, is your doing? She looked at him steadily. I keep the accounts, she said. It's my job. Beecham glanced at Nathaniel, who was watching this exchange with the expression of a man watching something work exactly as it should and being appropriately impressed by it. Your husband, Beecham said, has been a client of mine for 6 years. In 6 years, he has never once renegotiated a supply contract. He didn't know he needed to, she said. Nobody told him. Nobody. Beecham stopped. Mrs. Brooks, did anyone ever tell him Granger was overcharging? Apparently not, she said. Beecham looked at this contract again. No, he said thoughtfully. No, I suppose they didn't. Walking back to the wagon after Nathaniel said, You let Beecham think you stumbled onto the Granger thing. I let Beecham think what was most useful, she said. He thinks you just happened to review the contracts. He thinks I'm competent and lucky, she said. Men like Beecham are more comfortable with luck than with strategy in a woman. I'd rather he underestimate me slightly and trust me fully than the other way around. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. That is, he said, the most calculated thing I've ever heard someone say while sounding completely reasonable. Thank you, she said. He made the sound, the real one. She got into the wagon. The February note was paid on the 10th of the month, in full. At the bank in person with the corrected survey on file at the land registry and the Granger contract renegotiated and 3 months of market order revenue deposited and Beecham standing 2 feet away with the expression of a man who has revised his professional opinion upward considerably. The bank manager, a man named Whitfield, who had apparently had 2 separate conversations with Clayton Mercer's people in the past month, looked at the payment and then at the documents. Beecham laid on his desk and then at Nathaniel and said, Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Brooks. It is, Nathaniel said. Maggie said nothing. She sat in the chair beside Nathaniel's and she watched Whitfield sign the receipt and she thought about Mercer's conversations with Whitfield's people and she thought 2 conversations and they got exactly nothing from them. Outside the bank on the main street of Red Hollow, with the February cold coming off the mountains sharp and clear, Nathaniel turned to her and said, It's done. For now, she said. For now, he agreed. But he's out of angles. She thought about that. She thought about whether it was true. He has one more, she said. Nathaniel looked at her. He still has standing in this community, she said. He still has money and social reach and the ability to make people question what they think they know about us. She paused. He can't touch the legal side anymore. He can't touch the financial side, but he can still touch the social one. How? Nathaniel said. By keeping the story alive, she said. The story about me, about what I am and why I'm here and what kind of woman makes an arrangement like this. She looked at the street around them. As long as people are uncertain about me, he has something to work with, something that keeps us slightly off balance, slightly on the defensive. What do we do about that? He said. She thought. We stop being on the defensive, she said. We stop reacting to his story, and we tell our own. How? She looked down the street toward the church at the far end. She thought about the spring social. The pastor had mentioned it 3 weeks ago at the general store in passing the big community gathering that happened every April, the one where the whole county came together and where social standing was established and confirmed and challenged and realigned. April, she said. The spring social. He followed her gaze. You want to attend the spring social, he said. I want to do more than attend, she said. I want to bring food and run a table and talk to people and let them see exactly what I am, not what Mercer says I am. Not what the rumors say I am. She paused. I want them to decide for themselves. He was quiet. That means, she said, letting them look. Really look, which means standing there and not flinching and being exactly who I am in front of everyone who's been wondering. I know what it means, he said. I'm not worried about the looking. He paused. I'm worried about what it costs you. She looked at him. I've been paying that cost my whole life, she said. The difference is that this time I'm not paying it alone. He held her gaze. Then he said, The spring social it is. She nodded. She started walking back to the wagon. Behind her, she heard him say quietly. Not to her. Not really. More to the cold air and the wide street and the February sky above Red Hollow. God help Clayton Mercer. She kept walking, but she smiled, and she did not hide it. 3 weeks before the spring social, Vivian Carlyle came to the ranch, not sent by Mercer, not with any obvious motive. She rode up on a Tuesday afternoon, which was not a visiting day by any convention Maggie knew, and she tied her horse at the post and knocked on the front door with the particular knock of a person who has decided to do something and is not going to let themselves change their mind. Maggie opened the door. They looked at each other. "I brought something," Vivian said. She was holding a cloth-wrapped package with both hands. "Come in," Maggie said. Vivian came in. She stood in the kitchen and looked around with the look of a woman seeing something she had imagined differently, and Maggie let her look without comment. Vivian set the package on the kitchen table and unwrapped it. Inside was a journal. Leather-bound old pages, soft with age. "It was Clara's," Vivian said. "She gave it to me to keep for safekeeping the last winter she was sick. She said she didn't want Nathaniel to find it before she was ready to give it to him, and then she—" Vivian stopped. Started again. "She didn't get to give it to him herself, and I've been holding it for 3 years, and I don't know why I kept it so long, except that I didn't know what to do with it, and I—" She looked at her hands. "I thought he should have it. He should have had it years ago." Maggie looked at the journal. She thought about what it would mean to Nathaniel to receive this, to understand that it had existed for 3 years in the hands of someone who had not given it to him. "Did you read it?" Maggie asked. Vivian's jaw tightened. "No," she said. "I didn't." "I believe you," Maggie said. Vivian looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes," Maggie said. "I think you're not that kind of person." Something in Vivian's face shifted. The careful composure loosened very slightly, the way a fist loosens when someone finally takes the weight it was holding. "I was terrible to you," Vivian said. "At the store. And I said things to people. Things I said about why you were here and what kind of woman does this." She stopped. "They weren't true. I knew they weren't true when I said them. I was—" She stopped again. "Hurting," Maggie said. "Yes," Vivian said. "I know," Maggie said. She picked up the journal carefully. She set it to the side of the table safe. She would give it to Nathaniel tonight. She would sit with him while he read it if he wanted, or leave him alone if he needed that. "Thank you for bringing it," she said to Vivian. Vivian nodded. She picked up the cloth she'd wrapped it in, and her hands were not entirely steady. "The spring social," Maggie said. Vivian looked up. "I'm going to need people who know this community," Maggie said, "to help me make a table worth stopping at. Clara used to run a table, I understand." Vivian stared at her. "You have standing in this town," Maggie said. "I don't. Not yet. But you do." She looked at Vivian steadily. "I'm not asking you to do something for me. I'm asking if you want to do something for this county, for the women in it, who are trying to build something real, and are getting stepped on by men who think the land belongs to whoever can outmaneuver the title office." A long silence. "Mercer's been at my father's business too," Vivian said quietly. "Not overtly, but I've seen it." "I know," Maggie said. "He does it to everyone eventually. He just does it to different people in different ways." Vivian looked at the space where the journal had been. "I'll help with the table," she said. "Thank you," Maggie said. After Vivian left, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the journal in front of her and thought about 3 years, and a woman she had never met, and a man who had learned to be alone, and a spare room that had been kept neat in honor of someone who was gone. She thought about how many ways grief could shape a life without anyone's permission. She was still sitting there when Nathaniel came in from the barn, mud on his boots, and the particular tiredness of a man who had done physical work all day and was ready to be inside. He saw the journal. He stopped. She said, "Vivian Carlyle brought it. It was Clara's. She'd been keeping it for her since the last winter." He didn't move. "She didn't read it," Maggie said. "I believe her." He walked to the table slowly. He sat down. He looked at the journal and didn't pick it up. 3 years, he said. "She didn't know what to do with it," Maggie said. "I think she was afraid. And then other things got in the way. People let time do that." He put his hand on the journal. Just his hand on the cover. He didn't open it. "I'll be in the kitchen," she said. "Take whatever time you need." "Stay," he said. She stayed. She sat across from him, and she watched him open the journal, and she watched him read, and she did not speak, and did not look away, and she was simply present, which was, She had come to understand the thing she had been waiting her whole life to be allowed to be simply completely unreservedly present for another person, without being asked to make herself smaller to do it. He read for a long time. When he finally closed it and looked up, his eyes were red at the edges, and his face had that open and guarded look again, but deeper than she'd seen it before, deeper than the market or the kitchen table, or any of the moments she had filed away. She wrote about the ranch, he said. She wrote about what she wanted it to become. Tell me, Maggie said. He told her, and in the telling something was released that had been held tight for 3 years, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the Wyoming night sat over the land with its enormous cold patience, and inside Canyon Creek Ranch, a man finally put down something he had been carrying alone for far too long. She did not try to take it from him. She just sat with him while he set it down. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Clara's journal changed something in the house, not dramatically. Not in the way that things changed in stories, where a revelation reshapes everything overnight, and people wake up different. It changed the way light changed in a room when someone finally opened a window that had been stuck shut for years gradually, and then all at once, and then so naturally, you could barely remember what the room had looked like before. Nathaniel talked about Clara more after that. Not constantly, not in a way that displaced anything present, but in the easy, unhurried way of a man who had been given permission to let someone he loved take up space in his current life, without that meaning he was still living in the past. He mentioned her at breakfast sometimes. A thing she used to say. A way she used to do something. And Maggie listened and asked questions when she had them, and did not flinch, and did not perform her lack of flinching, because she had meant what she said. They were not competing. There was room enough. What she had not anticipated was what the journal said. He told her that first night some of it. Clara had written about the ranch what she'd wanted it to become. A place that was open. A place that fed people, not just the hands who worked it, but neighbors, travelers, people who needed a meal and a moment of steadiness. She had written about the market table as something she hoped would become a tradition, a way of connecting the ranch to the community around it, rather than existing apart from it. She had written in the last pages of the journal that she hoped Nathaniel would not stay alone too long, that he was not built for solitude whatever he thought, that the right person when they came would see through the quiet exterior to the man underneath, and that man deserved to be seen. Nathaniel had told Maggie this, and then stopped and looked at his hands on the journal cover and said, "I think she would have liked you." Maggie had said, "I think I would have liked her," and that was all they said about it. But she thought about those words, the right person would see through the quiet exterior, more than she told him. She thought about them in the mornings when she handed him his coffee and watched him come fully awake across the table. She thought about them when she caught him watching her manage something he hadn't thought needed managing, and his expression did the thing. It did the quiet, steady recognition. She thought about them when Calhoun said Mrs. Brooks, and it settled in her chest, like something that had always belonged there. Clara had known. She had not met Maggie, and could not have imagined her specifically, but she had known the shape of what was needed, and she had written it down, and 3 years later, it had arrived on a train from Cheyenne, with one bag, and a folded letter, and a lifetime of practice at not hoping. It was the most extraordinary, ordinary thing. The spring social was 3 weeks away. She threw herself into the preparation with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything which Nathaniel had learned to recognize as what happened when she cared about something and was not going to say so directly. She and Vivian Carlyle met twice at the ranch kitchen, which was its own particular kind of extraordinary. Maggie thought the two of them at the same table with coffee between them, finding their way towards something that was not quite friendship yet, but was something real and honest and without pretense. Vivian was sharp. Sharper than Maggie had given her credit for initially, and she had given her considerable credit from the start. She knew the county who was aligned with Mercer, and how loosely who was waiting to see which way things settled, who had their own grievances with him and might be moved by seeing someone stand up successfully. She mapped it out over the kitchen table with the precision of a woman who had grown up watching social dynamics the way some people watched weather as a matter of practical survival. The Hargreave family, Vivian said. They're the ones to reach. If the Hargreaves are at your table on Saturday, 3 other families follow automatically. What do the Hargreaves care about? Maggie said. Their daughter, Vivian said. She married a man last year who turned out to be exactly what certain people warned them he was. They're protective now of women who seem to be making practical decisions about their lives. Maggie looked at her. I'm not saying it to be cruel, Vivian said. I'm saying it because you asked what they care about, and that's the honest answer. I know, Maggie said. I'm not offended. I'm taking notes. Vivian looked at her across the table. You really do think in straight lines, don't you? It's more efficient, Maggie said. Something in Vivian's face relaxed a fraction more. Clara used to say that straight lines were the shortest distance between where you were and where you needed to be, but they missed everything interesting on the sides. Maggie thought about that. She's not wrong, she said. But when the interesting things on the sides are trying to undermine your land title, straight lines have their value. Vivian laughed. Actually laughed short and surprised and real, and Maggie thought, there it is. That's the person under the beautiful Tuesday dress. What are you making for the table? Vivian asked. Everything I have left in the preserve stock, Maggie said. And I've been putting up new batches all week. Beeswax candles. I've got Clara's boxes going full time. Dried herb bundles. And I want to offer something different this time. She paused. I want a recipe card. One simple recipe written out that people can take home. Something anyone can make. Vivian looked at her. Why? Because, Maggie said, people remember what's useful to them. A jar of preserve gets eaten and forgotten. A recipe gets made again. Every time they make it, they think of where it came from. Vivian was quiet for a moment. That's very clever, she said. It's very practical, Maggie said. Same thing, Vivian said. And there was a warmth in it that had not been there 6 weeks ago, and Maggie received it without comment and filed it in the same place she kept things that were real. The night before the spring social, Maggie could not sleep. She lay on her side of the bed, their bed now, in the room that had been the spare room, which was still faded at the curtain and still had the careful rug, but was no longer the room she'd been afraid to get under the quilt in. And she stared at the wall in the dark, and she thought about the next day. She thought about the whole county coming together on Main Street. She thought about every person who had heard the story about her. The woman from nowhere, who had maneuvered a lonely widower. The woman with no other options who had arrived and taken advantage of a good man's isolation. She thought about every person who had decided what she was before they met her. And she thought about standing in front of all of them tomorrow, with a table full of things she had made, and a husband who would not apologize for her, and a community she had decided to belong to, whether it was ready for her or not. She had done this her whole life. Arrived somewhere, been assessed, found wanting, moved on. She was not moving on. She pressed her hand flat on the quilt, and she thought, this is mine, this house, this land, this man asleep beside me, who held a line for 3 years alone, and has not once looked at me and done that calculation. This is mine, and I am not giving it up, and I am not shrinking, and I am not apologizing, and I am walking into that social tomorrow, and I am going to let every single person in that county decide for themselves what they think of me. And whatever they decided, she was still going to be here Monday morning making coffee. She fell asleep. She was up before sunrise. Nathaniel found her in the kitchen at first light, with every surface covered in things, ready to be boxed. Preserves lined up by type candles wrapped in cloth. Herb bundles tied a stack of recipe cards she had written out by hand the previous afternoon in her clear, even script. He stood in the doorway and looked at all of it. You've been up for a while, he said. Couldn't sleep, she said. Coffee's on. He came in and poured his own cup and stood beside her and looked at the table. You're nervous, he said. I'm prepared, she said. You can be both, he said. She looked at him. I'm a little nervous, she said. He nodded. Good, means it matters. It matters, she said. He looked at the recipe cards. He picked one up and read it. He set it down. Cornbread, he said. Everyone can make cornbread, she said. And everyone thinks theirs is the best. Giving them a recipe is not a threat to their cornbread. It's a conversation. He looked at her with the expression she had come to love most, the one that meant she had just done something that surprised him, and he was deciding he should have expected it. "You've thought about this a lot," he said. "I think about everything a lot," she said. "I know," he said. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, with no implication that this was anything other than exactly as it should be, landed in her chest. The way his words often landed solidly and without drama, like something settling into its right place. Rios appeared at the kitchen door at 7 with McKee behind him. "We're coming," Rios said. "To the social." She looked at him. "We help set up the table," he said. "And we stay." "You don't have to." "We want to," McKee said. "All four of us." He paused. "Walsh said to tell you he's coming too." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell Walsh he can help carry the boxes," she said. McKee grinned. He had a very young grin. McKee, the kind that still had no self-consciousness in it. They loaded the wagon, and they all went to town, which was, she acknowledged to herself privately, not something she had imagined the morning she had stepped off the train and stood on that platform trying not to hope. She had not imagined arriving at a spring social with a wagon full of things. She had made a husband on the seat beside her, 4 ranch hands in the back who had put on their good shirts again, and a woman named Vivian Carlyle, who was going to meet her there and help run the table. She had imagined surviving. She had imagined making herself useful enough to stay. She had not imagined this. Main Street was already alive when they arrived, wagons and horses and people in their good clothes, children running the smell of food from 3 directions at once. Tables were being set up along both sides of the street. The noise of it was the particular noise of people who had been cooped up through a Wyoming winter and were ready to be together again. She got down from the wagon before Nathaniel could come around to help her, because she was not a woman who waited for help. She didn't need, and she started directing the unloading with the calm efficiency of someone who had thought through exactly where everything went. Rios and McKee moved the boxes without being told twice. Walsh set up the table legs with a competence that reminded her he had been a working man long before he had been Mercer's informant, and that working men were most themselves when they were doing actual work. Calhoun stood to one side and watched the whole operation, and then said when the table was up and the goods were arranged, "That's a good-looking table, Mrs. Brooks." "Thank you, Calhoun," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and stepped back to his watching position, which she had come to understand was his way of being present and protective without making a production of it. Vivian arrived 10 minutes later with 2 crates of her own. She had made pressed flower cards, thin paper cards with dried wildflowers mounted on them, delicate and beautiful and entirely unlike anything else on the street. She set them at the end of the table, and they looked perfect there, and Maggie told her so. "Clara used to press flowers," Vivian said. "I know," Maggie said. "Nathaniel told me." Vivian looked at her. "It's a good addition," Maggie said. "Thank you." People started coming by. The first hour was what she'd expected. Curiosity dressed up as commerce. People picked up jars and read labels and asked prices with the slight excess of casualness that meant they were actually looking at her, measuring her, running her against the story they'd heard, and checking for consistency. She let them look. She answered questions plainly. She did not perform warmth, and she did not perform indifference. She was exactly who she was, which was a woman who knew what she had made and why it was worth buying, and who could tell you so without apology. The Hargreave family came at mid-morning, as Vivian had predicted they would. Mrs. Hargreave was a tall woman with the upright bearing of someone who had decided somewhere along the way that she was going to take up the space she occupied and not apologize for it, which made Maggie like her immediately and instinctively. She looked at the table. She looked at Maggie. She picked up a jar of chokecherry preserve and held it to the light. "You made this yourself," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Maggie said. "On the Brooks Ranch." "Canyon Creek Ranch," Maggie said. "Yes." Mrs. Hargreave looked at her with the direct assessing look of a woman who had learned to take accurate readings of other women. "I've heard things about you," she said. "I imagine you have," Maggie said. "I've also heard," Mrs. Hargreave said, "that you told Clayton Mercer to his face at the fall market that you knew about his 3-year campaign against Nathaniel Brooks's land title." She paused. "And that you said it like it was nothing." "I said it because it was relevant," Maggie said. "It wasn't nothing, but I wasn't afraid of it." Mrs. Hargreave looked at her for another moment. Then she set the jar down and picked up 2 more. "I'll take 4 jars," she said, "and one of the recipe cards." Behind Mrs. Hargreave, as if a signal had been given, and it had. Maggie understood it absolutely had. This was exactly how social currency worked in small communities. 3 other women stepped forward to look at the table. Within 20 minutes, there was a line. Not a dramatic line, not a crowd pressing forward, just a steady, purposeful queue of people who had decided that the Canyon Creek table was worth stopping at. She worked the table without stopping. She answered questions, made change, wrote down 2 new orders in the order book, and handed out recipe cards to anyone who asked, and several people who didn't know they wanted one until she offered. She was wrapping a candle set for a woman from the north end of the county when she became aware of a stillness nearby. Not the stillness of Mercer last time, that had been predatory stillness, a man waiting to see if he'd been noticed. This was different. This was the stillness of a crowd parting. She finished wrapping the candle. She handed it over. She looked up. Clayton Mercer was standing at the edge of the street, 15 feet from the table, and he was watching. He was not alone. He had 2 men with him, the particular kind of men who stood close to wealthy men at public events, and they were all 3 watching the table and the line in front of it, and her behind it. She looked at him. He looked at her. He had not come to the table. He had come to witness. To see whether his story still had traction, whether the cloud of implication he had built over her name had done its work, whether the county had decided she wasn't worth the line forming in front of her. The line was still forming. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Not long enough to be a challenge, not short enough to be a flinch. Just long enough to make clear that she had seen him and was not disrupted by the seeing. Then she turned back to the next customer. She heard, rather than saw him walk away. Nathaniel appeared at her elbow 10 minutes later. He had been moving through the social on his own, talking to ranchers, catching up with men he knew. Doing the thing that she understood he was good at when he chose to do it, which was the straight-spoken exchange of information and opinion between people who respected each other's practicality. "He's here," Nathaniel said quietly. She said. "He left." He looked at her. "You saw him." "He stood there for about 2 minutes," she said. "Then he saw the line and left." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. She handed him a recipe card without looking up. He took it. He looked at it. "Cornbread," he said. "I'm starting a tradition," she said. He looked at the line. He looked at Vivian at the far end of the table, talking to a woman about the pressed flowers with an animation Maggie had not seen in her before. He looked at Calhoun standing back and watching the whole street with his patient, comprehensive attention. "Maggie," he said. She was making change. "What?" "Look up for a second," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the full open version of that expression, no reserve in it, no management. Just him. "This is what I wanted," he said. "When I wrote that advertisement, I didn't know this was what I wanted, but this is it." She held his gaze. "A market table," she said. "You," he said. "This. All of it. All of—" She looked back at the table and the line and Vivian and Calhoun and the whole improbable reality of what she was standing in the middle of, and she felt something that was so large and so complete that she could not have said what to call it, only that it filled every space she had ever kept empty as a precaution. "You've got customers," she said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted you to know." He moved on down the street. She sold the last preserve jar at 3 in the afternoon. She sold the last candle 20 minutes after that. By the time the social began to wind down, and the wagons started pulling away, and the street thinned, and the afternoon light went long and amber over the buildings, the Canyon Creek table was empty of goods and full of a different kind of stock. An order book with 11 new names. A stack of recipe cards reduced to 7, and the particular earned satisfaction of a day that had gone exactly as planned. Better than planned. She was folding the tablecloth when she heard a voice behind her that she recognized but had not expected. "Mrs. Brooks." She turned. "Mrs. Farley." The general store. The woman who had looked at her with 2 words of judgment the first time Nathaniel had put her name on the credit account. Mrs. Farley was standing with her hands folded in front of her, and her expression was not warm exactly. It was not a woman built for warm, Maggie had decided, but it was something different from what it had been in November. "I wanted to say," Mrs. Farley said, "that the choke cherry preserve I bought in the fall was the best I've had in years. My sister came to visit in January and asked where I'd gotten it." Maggie looked at her. "She'd like to order 2 jars, Mrs. Farley said, if you're taking orders." Maggie reached into her coat pocket and produced the order book. "Name and address," she said. Mrs. Farley gave them. She watched Maggie write them down with a look that was doing something complicated, some internal adjustment being made, some recalculation of a position she had held since November. "You've done well here," Mrs. Farley said. "With the ranch. With—" She gestured vaguely at the street, at the emptied table, at everything it represented. "People weren't sure when you first arrived." "I know," Maggie said. "They are now," Mrs. Farley said, simply, just that. She nodded, not quite a bow, but something in the direction of one, and walked away. Maggie stood with the order book in her hand, and she thought, that is the hardest kind of acknowledgement to give from a person who gave you the hardest kind of look. And she gave it anyway. That means something. It meant the story was changing. Not Mercer's story. Not the story about who Maggie was and why she was here and what kind of woman made an arrangement like this. That story was losing air. Had been losing air since the market in November, since the Harlan letter, since the February note, paid in full on time in public, with Beecham standing 2 feet away. The story that was growing in its place was the true one. She closed the order book. Rios appeared at her elbow and picked up one end of the folded table without being asked. She took the other end. They carried it to the wagon together. "Good day," Rios said. "Very good day," she said. He nodded. He went back for the crates. The revelation about Mercer came 4 days later, and it came not from the direction she had been watching. She had been watching the land side, the title, the bank, the supply contracts. She had been watching the social side, the county opinion, the spring social fallout, the story changing. What she had not been watching, because she had not known there was anything to watch, was the Carlisle property. Vivian came to the ranch on a Wednesday afternoon, and she was not composed. She was not the carefully arranged version of herself that she brought to most situations. She was upset in the genuine, unmanaged way of someone who has just understood something they wish they hadn't. She sat at the kitchen table, and she told Maggie what she had found. Her father's northern field. The one that bordered Mercer's property had a deed restriction on it that had been filed 18 months ago without her father's knowledge. The filing used a document that bore her father's signature, but that he had not signed. The restriction limited the field's use in ways that benefited Mercer's water access. Forged document. Maggie sat very still. "Does your father know?" she said. "I told him this morning," Vivian said. He's not well, Maggie. He hasn't been well for over a year. He doesn't always—" She stopped, started again. He didn't understand all of it. "Does anyone else know about this filing?" "Not yet," Vivian said. "Then we go to Beecham today," Maggie said. "Right now, before Mercer knows you found it." Vivian looked at her. "Right now," Maggie said again. She was already standing. "I'll send Rios to find Nathaniel, and I'll have McKee saddle the horses." "Maggie." "Vivian." She put her hand on the table and looked at her directly. "He forged your father's signature on a legal document. That's not a land dispute. That is a crime. And if he did it to your father, he has done it before, or he will do it again. Beecham needs to see this today." Vivian's jaw set. "All right," she said. They rode to town. Beecham's reaction to the forged document was the reaction of a man who had suspected something like this existed and had not had proof until now. He was very still for exactly 30 seconds after reading it, and then he became extremely efficient in the particular way of someone who has been waiting for a specific opportunity. "This is a criminal matter," he said. "I know," Maggie said. "Beyond civil complaint, beyond land dispute." He looked at Vivian. "Your father is willing to pursue this." "I'll make him understand," Vivian said. "He'll pursue it." Beecham looked at both of them across his desk. You understand that Mercer has resources. A legal action of this nature will not be quick or clean. I know what long and unclean looks like, Maggie said. We know how to manage it. He looked at her. Yes, he said after a moment. I believe you do. Nathaniel was at Beecham's office 30 minutes after they arrived. Rios had found him fast. He came in with the quick stride of a man who had been given minimal information and is doing the rapid calculation of what that minimal information might mean. And he looked at Maggie first, as she had noticed he always did, now looked to her first to read the room, and she gave him a small steady nod that meant serious, but handled. We're all right. He sat down. He listened to Beecham lay out the forged document situation with the compressed attention of a man absorbing a great deal very quickly. When Beecham finished, Nathaniel said, How long has he been doing this? Unknown, Beecham said. The Carlyle document is the one we have, but the methodology suggests practice. Meaning there are others, Nathaniel said. Almost certainly, Beecham said. Nathaniel looked at Maggie. The Northeast Survey Corner, she said. The title irregularity. What if that wasn't an 1861 surveying error? The room was very quiet. Beecham's expression changed. If the original boundary deviation was introduced into the record deliberately, Beecham said slowly, and if we can trace it, then it's not our problem to fix, Maggie said. It's his problem to answer for. Beecham stood up. I need to pull the original survey records. He was already reaching for his coat. All of them. Back to the filing. He looked at Maggie. You said the 1861 survey. How did you know the date? It was in the ledger margin note, she said. Nathaniel made a note 2 years ago. Survey boundary northeast 1861, ask Beecham. Beecham looked at Nathaniel. You never came to me about this. I forgot, Nathaniel said. You didn't forget, Maggie said. You had 11 other things to hold up at the same time. Beecham pulled his coat on. I'm going to the registry now, today. He picked up the Carlyle document. And I'm taking this to the territorial judge. Not Harlan above Harlan. This goes higher. He left. The three of them, Maggie, Nathaniel, Vivian, sat in the empty office for a moment. Vivian said, If he's been manipulating land records across the county, he has, Maggie said. Men like that don't do something once. They do it until they're stopped. How did nobody catch it? Vivian said. Because nobody was looking from the right angle, Maggie said. Everyone was looking at the disputes, the outcomes, without looking at the documents underneath them. She paused. And because people with money and standing in a small community don't get looked at closely until someone has a specific reason to look. Vivian was quiet. We gave them a reason, Maggie said. The investigation took 6 weeks. She did not narrate all 6 weeks to herself as they happened, because she had learned that the only productive thing to do with waiting is to keep working. She kept the ranch running. She filled the market orders. She started the spring garden that Clara's journal had mentioned and that she'd been planning since February. She wrote to 3 additional suppliers and renegotiated 2 more contracts and taught McKee the accounting method she used for the household ledger because she had decided that if something happened to her, the ranch should not lose the system. When McKee asked why she was teaching him, she said, Because competence shouldn't live in one person. If it does, it's fragile. He had written that down. She saw him do it. She didn't comment. Walsh, she noticed, had fully turned. Not with drama, not with declaration, but in the quiet, consistent way of a man who had recalculated where his actual loyalties lay and had redirected accordingly. He fixed a fence section without being asked. He took an extra night watch during the cold snap in March. He stopped going to the saloon on Tuesdays. She said nothing about any of this. She just noticed. The territorial judge's findings came on a Tuesday in April, which she would later think was appropriate. Tuesdays had been Mercer's day for secret meetings at the North Pasture boundary, and it was a Tuesday when it all came apart. Beecham came to the ranch himself to deliver the summary, which told her before he opened his mouth that it was significant. He sat at the kitchen table, Nathaniel across from him, Maggie at the end between them, and he laid out what the investigation had found. 7 properties. 7 separate instances of deed manipulation, boundary adjustment or false restriction filing over a period of 11 years. The Carlisle document was the most recent and the clearest, but it was not the only one. The northeast corner of Canyon Creek Ranch was one of them. Not an 1861 surveying error. A deliberate alteration filed in 1879, 4 years after Nathaniel's father had bought the land. Mercer had been building a strategy for over a decade. Patient, methodical, invisible, because the people he targeted were too busy holding their own land together to look at the documents underneath them. Beecham put the summary on the table between them. "He's been arrested," he said. "Yesterday morning. The territorial marshal." The kitchen was completely silent. "The properties with falsified records," Beecham said, "will be restored. That includes your northeast boundary, Nathaniel, which is now officially corrected and clean." He paused. "And the Carlisle northern field." Maggie looked at Nathaniel. He was looking at the summary. He looked like a man absorbing something too large to process quickly, which she understood because she was doing the same thing on the inside while keeping her face still. 11 years. Mercer had been doing this for 11 years, and it had taken a woman with no legal standing, no social history in the county, no particular reason to be believed arriving on a train with one bag and a folded letter. It had taken her reading a margin note in a ledger 2 years old and sending a man to a surveyor's office one day, ahead of his enemy, to pull on the thread that unraveled the whole thing. "Vivian," Maggie said. "I've already sent word," Beecham said. "She knows." Maggie nodded. Nathaniel said very quietly, "My father bought this land in 1875. He built the first structure with his own hands. He worked it for 8 years and left it to me when he died." He stopped. The whole time there was a falsified boundary in the record. "Yes," Beecham said. "He never knew," Nathaniel said. "No," Beecham said. "He never knew." The silence after that was the kind that didn't need filling. Beecham left after a while, taking his papers and his measured practicality with him, and Maggie got up and put the kettle on because she needed to do something with her hands and because the body continued to need tea regardless of what the mind was working through. She put the cup in front of Nathaniel. He wrapped both hands around it. "My father worked this land his whole adult life," he said. "And Mercer was sitting on that falsified boundary document the entire time, waiting. He never found the right moment to use it," she said. "And then you turned him down twice and he decided to make his own moment." Nathaniel looked at her. "If you hadn't come," he said. "I did come," she said. "Maggie." "I came," she said. "That's what matters. Everything else is a calculation about what might have happened, and there's no useful end to that." He was quiet. "What I want you to understand," she said, "is that your father's work was real. Everything he built was real. Mercer didn't take any of that. He filed a piece of paper. He didn't change the land. He didn't change what was built on it. He just—" She paused. "He put a lie in a file somewhere, and he waited for it to matter. And it never got to matter. Because you held the line." "We held the line," Nathaniel said. "Yes," she said. "We." He looked at her across the kitchen table, their kitchen table in their house on land that was clean and documented and real, and he said, "I didn't know what I was writing for when I wrote that advertisement." "I know," she said. "I thought I needed help with the household," he said. "I thought I needed someone dependable, practical, someone who could manage the parts I wasn't managing." "You did need that," she said. "I needed you," he said. "Specifically. I just didn't have the language for it yet." She looked at her hands on the table. "I came here," she said, "because I had run out of places that wanted me, and I needed somewhere to be useful, and I was done apologizing for taking up space." She paused. "I did not come here expecting to be—" She stopped. "Loved," he said. Straight and plain, the way he said everything that mattered. "You can say it." She looked at him. "I did not come here," she said, "expecting to be loved." "No," he said. "But here we are." "Here we are," she said. The spring moved into summer, and the summer into fall, and Canyon Creek Ranch became as Clara had written in the last pages of her journal. The kind of place where people felt the pull of it from the road. Not because of wealth, not because of size, but because of the particular warmth that a house gives off when the people inside it have chosen each other freely and completely and without reservation. The market table became a fixture. Maggie ran it every season and trained McKee to help her and eventually to run it in her stead on weeks when she was needed at the ranch. The recipe cards became known throughout the county. She changed the recipe every season and people saved them, and she heard later from Mrs. Hargreave that a woman in the next county had a stack of Canyon Creek recipe cards going back 3 years that she kept in her kitchen drawer like a collected correspondence from a friend. She liked that. She liked it very much. Vivian Carlisle came to the ranch for dinner twice that first summer, and then more regularly after that, and eventually she and Maggie arrived at the thing that Maggie had felt was possible from the Tuesday afternoon, when the beautiful dress and the composed manner had cracked open long enough to let something real out. Not close friends, they were too different for that, and too aware of their history, and too honest with each other to pretend the past hadn't happened. But something true, something mutual, something that held up. Calhoun, who had worked Canyon Creek Ranch for 22 years total, by the time he finally retired, said at his last dinner at the table, "Mrs. Brooks, you fixed the chair leg. You fixed everything else. I reckon this place will hold." She said, "I reckon it will, Calhoun." He left the next morning. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him go, and she thought 22 years. And he stayed long enough to see it hold. Nathaniel found her at the window and stood beside her and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You think about the advertisement sometimes." "Sometimes," she said. "The 4 lines," he said. "4 lines," she said. "No promises made." "No promises," he said. "But here we are anyway." She turned from the window and looked at the kitchen. Their table, the shelves she had organized in her first week and had reorganized twice since. As the household grew, the ledger on the counter that she kept now in a system so clear that any person could walk in and understand the full picture of the ranch within an hour, the hook by the door where his coat hung next to hers. She thought about the train platform in the cold, the lantern, the 5 words that had almost buckled her knees. She thought about a woman who had spent her whole life being told she was too much arriving somewhere that turned out to be exactly enough. She thought about a spare room that was no longer spare, a house that was no longer empty, a line that had been held and held and held until the holding became something else, not just endurance, but a life, an actual life, built from the ground up by 2 people who had not known they were looking for each other until they were already looking at each other across a kitchen table in the dark. "You know what I've decided," she said. "What?" Nathaniel said. "The room upstairs," she said. "The one that used to be mine, the spare room." "What about it?" he said. "I'm going to make it into something useful," she said. "A proper guest room, for when people need somewhere to go." He looked at her. "Because sometimes," she said, "what a person needs most is for someone to say, 'I've got a room. It's yours. Come in out of the cold.'" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to do that for other people." "I'm going to try," she said. He looked at her with the full open version of his expression. No reserve in it, no management, just him, and he said, "You know there's no one like you." She looked at him. "There's no one like you," she said back. "Stubborn, plain-spoken man who carried too much alone for too long and forgot to ask for help." "Until I wrote an advertisement," he said. "Until you wrote an advertisement," she said. He held out his hand. She took it. And Maggie Brooks, who had arrived in Red Hollow, Wyoming on a train from Cheyenne with 1 bag and a folded letter and a lifetime of practice at not hoping, stood in her kitchen with her husband's hand in hers, and understood with the complete and unshakable certainty of a woman who had finally stopped running and started building that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had rescued her, not because she had made herself small enough to fit, not because she had earned it by being useful enough and quiet enough and grateful enough for the space she was given, but because she had walked through a door that was genuinely open, and she had chosen to stay, and she had built something real with someone real, and it had held. She had always been enough. She had simply needed to find the place that already knew it. And she had. She had found it. She was home.